After giving birth, I bought my dream home to heal with my baby. The first night my mom called and said we are moving in tomorrow. I do not do rules for my grandchild. She even added your sister and her family are coming too. If you do not like it, then leave. I did not argue. When they barged in, they froze at who was waiting inside. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Erica, and at 34 years old, I finally had the life I had always wanted. I work as a forensic accountant for a major corporate firm in Chicago. For years, I spent my days unraveling complex financial fraud and tracing hidden assets for high-profile clients. The work was demanding and required a sharp eye for deception. That same sharp, analytical eye is exactly what helped me survive my own family. Sitting in the quiet nursery of my newly purchased historic home, I looked down at my newborn son Leo. He was sleeping peacefully in my arms. We had just come home from the hospital that afternoon. The air in the room smelled like baby lotion and the fresh lavender paint I had personally chosen for the walls. This house was my absolute sanctuary. It was a massive 6-bedroom estate in one of the most prestigious suburbs of Chicago. It featured towering oak doors, a grand winding staircase, and a backyard large enough for Leo to run around in when he grew older. Buying this property outright in cash was the culmination of a decade of relentless hard work. I had invested wisely, saved aggressively, and lived far below my means. I did all of this in complete secrecy. To my family, I was just a struggling single woman living in a cramped rental. I knew that if they ever discovered my true net worth, they would drain me dry without a second thought. My journey to motherhood was not easy. I had chosen to have Leo on my own using an anonymous donor through in vitro fertilization. It was a deeply personal choice made after realizing I did not need a partner to build a beautiful family. But in my mother Barbara's eyes, my independence was a personal insult. She viewed my donor pregnancy as an embarrassment to her carefully curated social image. She wanted a traditional son-in-law she could brag about to her friends at the country club. She never missed an opportunity to remind me that my life choices were a disappointment. The silence of the nursery was abruptly shattered by the harsh ringing of my cell phone. I reached for it quickly, hoping the loud noise would not wake the baby. The screen displayed my mother's name. I had not spoken to her since before I went into labor. She had not called to check on me during the complicated delivery, and she had not asked for a single picture of her new grandson. Against my better judgment, I answered the call and brought the phone to my ear, expecting a brief, obligatory congratulations. I did not even get a chance to say hello. Her voice came through the speaker loud and grating. "We are moving in tomorrow morning at 8 sharp," she announced. There was no greeting and no inquiry about how I was feeling after a major medical procedure. She just launched right into her demands. "I do not do rules for my grandchild Erica. I am not going to let you raise that boy alone in some depressing little rental house. You clearly do not know what you are doing, and you need guidance." I sat perfectly still, holding Leo closer to my chest. I listened as my mother continued her aggressive monologue. Her tone was dripping with the same condescending authority she had used to control me my entire life. "Your sister Vanessa and her husband Derek are coming too," she said. "Derek's startup is going through a transition phase, so they need a place to stay while they figure things out. They are going to take the top floor. Your father and I will take the master suite. If you do not like it, you can pack your bags and leave your own apartment." The sheer audacity of her statement washed over me. Vanessa was 31 years old and the undisputed golden child of the family. She had always received the best of everything. When I was 18, my parents drained the college savings account my grandfather had set up for me. They used every single penny to pay for Vanessa's extravagant destination wedding to Derek. Derek was an arrogant man who constantly started businesses that inevitably failed. My parents always bailed them out. Now they were planning to use my home as their personal safety net and demanding the master bedroom in the process. "You cannot move into my house," I said. keeping my voice low and steady so I would not disturb the sleeping baby. I just brought my son home from the hospital today. I need peace and quiet to recover. My mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Your house, she mocked. Do not make me laugh, Erica. You are a single mother pushing spreadsheets for a living. We all know you are renting that cramped little place. In fact, I have already handled the landlord situation, so you do not even have a say in the matter anymore. I furrowed my brow, confused for a fraction of a second. Handled the landlord, I repeated slowly, trying to process the sheer absurdity of her claim. Yes, she said, sounding incredibly smug and victorious. I found the property management company listed online for your address. I contacted them today and paid a hefty deposit to take over the lease. I signed the paperwork myself. It is my house now, so like I said, we are arriving at 8 in the morning. We will be bringing moving trucks. Do not try to lock us out, or I will have you removed from my own property. You need real family to step in before child services gets involved with your little science experiment of a baby. The cruelty of her words about my newborn son hung heavily in the air. For my entire life I had cried over her insults. I had begged for her approval and tried to reason with her twisted logic. I had spent countless nights wondering why I was never good enough for my own mother. But looking at Leo's tiny, perfect face, I felt absolutely nothing for the woman on the other end of the phone. The fear and the hurt were entirely gone. In their place was a cold, calculated clarity that I had honed through years of corporate forensic accounting. My mother actually believed she had outsmarted me. She truly thought she had gone behind my back and bought out the lease to my home to force me into submission. She had no idea that there was no landlord. She had no idea that the property management company she thought she was dealing with was actually a corporate entity that I owned and operated. She had forged a lease agreement and paid a deposit directly into a legal trap I had not even intentionally set for her. I did not argue with her. I did not scream or cry or try to explain that she was making a monumental mistake that would ruin her life. I simply moved the phone away from my ear and pressed the end call button. The line went dead. The house was quiet once again. I stood up from the vintage mahogany rocking chair and gently placed Leo into his bassinet. I tucked a soft, warm blanket around his tiny shoulders and watched his chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm. He was safe, and he would never have to endure the emotional abuse I grew up with. I promised him that right then and there. I walked out of the nursery and made my way down the grand winding staircase. My bare feet moved silently against the polished wood floors. I reached the main foyer and walked over to the advanced security panel on the wall. I entered my passcode and disabled the front door alarm. Then I walked into my massive custom kitchen and turned on the stove. I filled a kettle with water and began brewing a pot of chamomile tea, feeling entirely relaxed. I brought my warm teacup into the home office just off the living room. I sat down at my large desk and turned on the security camera monitors. The glowing screens displayed high-definition feeds of my private driveway, the heavy iron front gates, and the sprawling front lawn. I sat there in the dark, sipping my tea and watching the monitors with complete serenity. Hours passed in perfect silence. The sky outside slowly shifted from pitch black to a deep purple and finally to a pale morning blue. The sun began to rise over the Chicago skyline, casting long, bright shadows across my pristine lawn. Exactly at 7:45 in the morning, the heavy rumble of diesel engines echoed through the quiet upscale neighborhood. I watched on the screen as two massive moving trucks turned into my private driveway. A sleek luxury SUV followed closely behind them, parking right in front of my grand entrance. I could see my mother, my sister Vanessa, and Derek stepping out of the vehicle. They looked arrogant and victorious, adjusting their clothes and preparing to throw me out onto the street. I took one last sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and smiled at the glowing monitor. Let them come. The heavy brass knocker on my front door did not even have a chance to fall before the lock clicked open. I had disabled the security system, but I had not unlocked the deadbolt. My mother had clearly bullied a locksmith or the former listing agent into giving her a key under the guise of an emergency. The heavy oak door swung inward with a loud thud, hitting the wall of the grand foyer. Footsteps echoed across the imported Italian marble. I stood quietly in the kitchen archway holding my warm mug of chamomile tea and watched the invasion begin. My mother Barbara marched in first. She wore a pristine white pantsuit and oversized designer sunglasses that she did not bother to take off despite being indoors. She pointed a manicured finger toward my formal dining room, directing a team of 4 exhausted-looking movers carrying a massive, obnoxious leather sectional sofa. "Put that beast in the basement," my mother ordered the movers, her voice echoing off the 20-foot ceilings. "Actually, no. Just throw the dining table out into the garage. We need this space for the entertainment center. That antique wood is entirely too depressing for a modern family." Right behind her walked my younger sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was 31, but still carried herself like a high school homecoming queen who expected the seas to part when she walked through a room. She was holding a massive iced coffee and barking orders into her cell phone. Behind Vanessa trailed her husband, Derek. Derek was a man who considered himself a visionary entrepreneur, despite the fact that every single business venture he touched ended in bankruptcy. He was carrying a cardboard box labeled gaming equipment and surveying my elegant foyer with a look of absolute entitlement. "Careful with those boxes," Vanessa yelled at a mover who was struggling to carry a heavy crate up the front steps. "That is my tanning bed equipment. If you scratch the acrylic, I will personally make sure your company fires you." Derek wants his gaming setups in the den on the first floor, so clear out whatever junk is currently in there. The movers looked miserable. One of them, a young guy in a blue uniform, gently set down a box and looked toward my formal living room. He saw my carefully curated antique furniture. "Mom," he said to my mother, "we cannot just drag this antique furniture into the garage. It looks incredibly expensive, and it might get ruined by the humidity." My mother let out a sharp, exasperated sigh. "I am the tenant on the lease," she snapped. "I paid the deposit. I make the rules. Throw the junk in the garage before I decide to dock your pay for insubordination." I took a slow, calm sip of my tea. The hot liquid grounded me. For 33 years, this exact tone of voice from my mother would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have scrambled to please her. I would have moved the furniture myself just to avoid a screaming match. But today was different. Today I held all the cards. I stepped out of the kitchen archway and into the bright, natural light of the foyer. My voice was steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Put the furniture down," I told the movers. "You are not moving a single piece of my property into the garage." The movers froze, caught between my calm command and my mother's aggressive demands. Barbara whipped her head around and glared at me. She pulled her designer sunglasses down the bridge of her nose so she could shoot me a look of pure disgust. "Erica," she said my name like it was a disease. "I see you are still here. I thought I told you to pack your bags and leave. We are taking over this house. I do not have time to argue with a stubborn, ungrateful daughter today. Go upstairs, pack your cheap clothes, grab your little science experiment of a baby, and get out of my sight." Before I could even respond to the vile comment about my newborn son, Derek stepped forward. He dropped his box of gaming equipment onto the marble floor with a loud thud and marched right up to me. He used his height to try and physically intimidate me, stepping so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Listen to me, Erica," Derek sneered, looking down at me with a pathetic attempt at dominance. "Nobody wants you here. You have always been the family disappointment. You could not even find a man to marry you, so you had to go buy a baby from a clinic. Now you are trying to play house in a rental you obviously cannot afford. Mom paid the landlord the deposit to take over your lease last night. You have until noon to pack your bags and get off our property before I call the cops and have you removed for trespassing." I looked at Derek. I did not step back. I did not shrink. I simply stared at his reddening face and smiled. It was a cold, detached smile that seemed to unnerve him. "You really think you can just walk into a home and declare it yours? Because you paid a deposit?" I asked softly. Vanessa pushed her way past her husband and crossed her arms over her chest. She looked at my simple, comfortable postpartum clothes and scoffed. "Do not act like you own the place, Erica," she mocked. You are just a glorified house flipper working a miserable corporate job. You have always been a loser. You have always gotten the short end of the stick, and you know why. Because you do not deserve the best. I do. Vanessa took a step closer, her eyes flashing with cruel victory. You have always been jealous of me, she continued, her voice rising with arrogant glee. You were jealous when Mom and Dad bought me a brand new car for my sweet 16 while you had to take the bus. You were jealous when I married a real entrepreneur. And you are just mad now because Mom knows I deserve to raise my family in a big, beautiful house like this instead of you. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. You mean like the time Mom and Dad drained my entire college savings account just to pay for your lavish destination wedding in the Bahamas? I asked, keeping my tone conversational. The $50,000 Grandpa left specifically for my education that miraculously ended up paying for your ice sculptures and custom floral arrangements. Is that the kind of deserving you are talking about, Vanessa? Vanessa laughed, a high-pitched grating sound. She tossed her hair over her shoulder, completely unbothered by the reality of her theft. Oh, please, she scoffed. You were going to state college anyway. It would have been a complete waste of money on someone like you. I needed that wedding to establish our social circle. Mom and Dad knew that investing in my future was a much better bet than wasting it on a spreadsheet-pushing spinster. My mother stepped up beside Vanessa, nodding in agreement. Your sister is right, Erica. We did what was best for the family image, and right now the best thing for this family is for Vanessa and Derek to live in this house. Your negative energy brings everyone down. We cannot have that kind of toxicity around. Now hand over the keys and get out of the way. We are claiming the master suite. The pure delusion of their demands was almost cinematic. They truly believed they could simply barge into a multi-million-dollar estate, declare it their own, and banish me to the streets without a second thought. They had spent my entire life taking from me, and they fully expected me to just lay down and let them take my sanctuary too. My mother grabbed Vanessa by the arm and pointed down the long, wide hallway that led to the grand living room and the primary suite. Come on, Vanessa, my mother ordered, ignoring me entirely. Let us go pick out the best rooms. Derek, you make sure she's out of here by noon. If she resists, just throw her bags on the front lawn. I did not block their path. I did not raise my voice to stop them. I simply stepped aside and extended my hand toward the long hallway. By all means, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Go right ahead. Take a look at the master suite. Vanessa smirked at me, clearly believing she had won. She linked arms with our mother and they marched down the hallway, their heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. Derek gave me one last pathetic glare before turning to follow them. The movers stood awkwardly in the foyer, unsure of what to do next. I gestured for them to stay put and slowly walked down the hallway behind my family. The main living room of the house was a massive open space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the private gardens. It was decorated with elegant vintage pieces, rich velvet drapes, and a stunning marble fireplace. It was the heart of the home, a place I had designed specifically for peace and comfort. My mother and sisters strutted through the wide double doors of the living room, already talking about what walls they wanted to knock down and what paint colors they wanted to change. They were completely absorbed in their arrogant fantasy of claiming my beautiful home as their own. But as they crossed the threshold into the center of the room, their loud, obnoxious voices suddenly died in their throats. The confident clicking of their heels came to an abrupt halt. Vanessa gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. My mother went completely rigid, her designer handbag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Derek, walking in right behind them, nearly crashed into my mother. He opened his mouth to complain, but the words died as he saw what they were staring at. The sheer terror that washed over their faces was instantaneous. All the smugness, all the entitlement, and all the arrogant gloating evaporated into the morning air. They stood frozen in absolute shock, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Sitting directly in the center of the grand living room in a plush, tufted wingback chair was someone who was not supposed to be there. Someone they had gone to great illegal lengths to hide away from the world. Someone they thought they had silenced forever. He was holding my newborn baby Leo gently in his arms, looking down at the sleeping infant with a soft, loving expression. But as my mother, sister, and brother-in-law stood paralyzed in the doorway, The older man slowly lifted his head. His eyes locked onto my mother, and the soft expression vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sharp, furious clarity. The silence in the grand living room became absolute, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that follows a lightning strike before the thunder rolls in. My mother stood frozen just inches past the mahogany double doors. Her designer handbag hung limply from her wrist. Vanessa was beside her, looking like she had just seen a ghost. The plastic cup of iced coffee in her hand trembled so violently that the ice cubes rattled against the sides. Derek peered over their shoulders, his aggressive posture deflating as confusion washed over his face. Sitting in the center of the room, bathed in the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, was Grandpa Thomas. He was nestled comfortably in my plush emerald-green wingback chair. In his strong, steady arms, he gently cradled my newborn son, Leo. For 2 years, my mother and sister had spun a tragic, elaborate web of lies about the man sitting before them. They had called family meetings weeping crocodile tears as they announced that Grandpa Thomas had succumbed to severe, rapid-onset dementia. They claimed he was violent, paranoid, and a danger to himself. Under the guise of protecting him, Barbara and Vanessa had secretly petitioned the court to declare him legally incompetent. They seized full control of his $5 million estate and immediately locked him away in a squalid state-run nursing facility on the outskirts of the city. They banned visitors, claiming seeing family caused him too much agitation. The truth was, they simply wanted his money and they wanted him silenced. Now the man they had discarded like trash was sitting in my living room looking healthier and sharper than he had in a decade. His silver hair was neatly combed. He wore a crisp, tailored dress shirt, and his posture was perfectly upright. There was no trace of the vacant, medicated stare they had forced upon him. "Dad," my mother finally gasped, her voice a high-pitched squeak of pure panic. She forced a frantic, twitching smile onto her face and took a hesitant step forward. "What are you doing here?" Grandpa Thomas did not blink. He did not smile. He simply stared at the woman who had stolen his life and sold his dignity. He adjusted his grip on baby Leo, shielding the infant slightly from my mother's line of sight. "Erica." My mother spun around to face me, her manicured fingers trembling as she pointed in my direction. Her frantic smile dissolved into a mask of desperate fury. "Did you kidnap him from the facility? Are you completely insane? That is a federal crime. I am his legal guardian. I have the paperwork. You cannot just break a severely ill man out of his care center." Vanessa immediately jumped in, her voice shrill and panicked. "Oh my God, Mom, she kidnapped him. Erica kidnapped Grandpa. Derek, call the police right now. She is endangering a dementia patient. This is exactly why she is the family disappointment. She has completely lost her mind." Derek reached for his phone, fumbling with it in his haste. But before his thumb could swipe across the screen, a voice boomed through the living room. It was a voice that commanded absolute obedience, a voice that had built a manufacturing empire from the ground up. "Put the phone away, Derek." The command cracked through the air like a whip. Derek froze, his thumb hovering over the screen. Vanessa let out a sharp gasp. My mother physically recoiled as if she had been struck. Grandpa Thomas slowly stood up from the wingback chair. He moved with a steady, deliberate grace that completely shattered the illusion of the frail, dying man they had described to the extended family. He gently transferred the sleeping baby back into my arms. I took Leo and stepped back, allowing my grandfather to take the center stage he so rightfully deserved. "I was not kidnapped." "Barbara, Grandpa?" Thomas said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. His eyes locked onto my mother, pinning her in place. "And as you can clearly see, I am not suffering from late-stage dementia. I never was." My mother swallowed hard, her face turning the color of chalk. "Dad," she stammered, taking another step back. "You do not know what you are saying. You are sick. The doctor said you have episodes of lucidity, but you are not well. You need your medication. You need to come with me right now before you hurt yourself or the baby." "Do not dare insult my intelligence," Barbara Grandpa Thomas warned, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "The doctors did not say I was sick. The disgraced physician you bribed to sign my incompetency papers said I was sick." The corrupt administrators at that hellhole facility you dumped me in kept me heavily sedated on antipsychotics, so I could not advocate for myself. You over-medicated me to steal my life. Vanessa let out a choked whimper. She grabbed Derek's arm, her knuckles turning white. "Mom," she whispered frantically. "Mom, what is happening? How is he talking like this?" "He is talking like this because he is entirely sober and of completely sound mind," I interjected, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with my grandfather. 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator to look into the facility you chose. When I realized what you were doing, I filed an emergency medical injunction. I legally transferred him to a private specialized detox clinic. It took weeks to flush the heavy sedatives out of his system. But once the drugs were gone, his mind was perfectly clear. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. Her pristine white pantsuit suddenly looked entirely out of place in a room where her darkest sins were being laid bare. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, trying to physically hold herself together. "You had no right to interfere." "Erica," my mother snapped, trying to reclaim her false authority. "I had full power of attorney. A judge signed off on my guardianship. I made the decisions regarding his care. What you did is medical interference, and I will have you arrested. I am taking him back to the facility today." "You are not taking me anywhere," Grandpa Thomas said, his voice laced with a cold fury I had never heard him use before. "You seized my $5 million estate, Barbara. You sold my home. You liquidated my stock portfolios. You and your golden child, Vanessa, have been living like queens on the money I worked my entire life to build. You thought you could lock me in a chemical prison and wait for me to die. I did it for your own protection," my mother shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the large room. "You were making bad financial decisions. You were losing your grip on reality. I saved the family assets. You stole the family assets." I corrected her, my tone unwavering. "You used his money to fund Vanessa's lavish lifestyle and Derek's failed businesses. You bought country club memberships and designer clothes, while you left your own father sitting in a soiled bed, staring at a blank wall." Vanessa burst into tears, attempting to use her classic manipulation tactic. "Grandpa, please," she sobbed, taking a step toward him. "We love you. We thought you were dying. Mom said the doctors gave you a year at most. We were just trying to keep the family safe. Do not look at us like we are criminals. We are your family." Grandpa Thomas looked at Vanessa with absolute disgust. "You are no family of mine," he stated firmly. "Family does not drug their elders for a payout. Family does not forge medical records. And family certainly does not storm into a new mother's home attempting to throw a newborn baby out onto the street." Derek, puffing out his chest, stepped in front of Vanessa. "Look, old man," Derek sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. "I do not care what kind of miraculous recovery you think you made. You do not own this house. My mother-in-law paid the deposit. This property belongs to us now. We have the lease. We have the legal right to be here. So you and Erica can take your little sob story and get out before I call the authorities and have you both dragged out in handcuffs." I watched Derek puff himself up, and I almost felt pity for his absolute stupidity. He was clinging to a forged lease agreement, like a life raft, completely unaware that he was already drowning. Grandpa Thomas did not even flinch at Derek's threat. Instead, a dark, knowing smile spread across his weathered face. He reached up and adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt, looking from Derek to Vanessa, and finally settling his piercing gaze on my mother. "You always were arrogant, Barbara, Grandpa," Thomas said, shaking his head slowly. "You always believed you were the smartest person in the room. You thought because Erica was quiet and independent that she was weak. You thought because I was old that I was defenseless. But Erica did not just rescue me from that facility 3 months ago. She did not just oversee my medical recovery and help me detox from your poison." My mother's eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for an exit strategy that did not exist. "What else did she do?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "She brought my lawyer," Grandpa Thomas announced. I turned slightly and gestured toward the heavy oak doors of my home office located just off the main living room. The doors opened with a smooth, deliberate click. Stepping out of the shadows of the office was Attorney Caldwell. He was a ruthless, high-profile estate litigator known throughout Chicago for dismantling fraudulent guardianships and destroying financial criminals in court. He wore a sharp, bespoke charcoal suit and carried a thick, distressed leather briefcase. His expression was entirely predatory. He looked at my mother and sister the way a hawk looks at cornered prey. Caldwell walked to the center of the room, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly against the marble threshold. He stopped right beside Grandpa Thomas, placing his heavy briefcase onto the gleaming surface of my antique coffee table. He popped the brass latches open with a sharp, resounding snap that made Vanessa physically jump. "Good morning, Barbara," Attorney Caldwell said, his voice smooth, professional, and absolutely lethal. "Good morning, Vanessa. Derek, I understand you are here to discuss a property dispute, but before we get to the matter of this house, we have a much larger issue to address regarding a massive case of grand larceny, elder abuse, and federal wire fraud." The air in the room grew instantly cold. My mother's knees visibly buckled. She reached out and grabbed the back of a dining chair to keep from collapsing onto the floor. Vanessa stopped crying, her mouth hanging open in sheer terror. Derek took a step backward, all his false bravado vanishing as he stared at the thick stacks of legal documents Caldwell was pulling from his briefcase. The invasion was officially over, the trap had been sprung, and they had walked right into it. The silence in the room was absolute, but Derek was never one to let a moment of silence stand when he could fill it with his own ego. The sudden appearance of Attorney Caldwell and my grandfather had clearly rattled him, but Derek was a man completely blinded by his own narcissism. Instead of recognizing that he had walked into a meticulously set trap, his fragile pride took over. I watched as his face contorted from shock back to a mask of sneering arrogance. He puffed out his chest, standing at his full height, to try and reclaim the authority he felt he was owed. He was not about to let a woman or an elderly man dictate the terms of his life. "You think you are so smart, Erica?" Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think bringing some slick suit into my house is going to change the facts? You have always been pathetic, trying to overcompensate because you have nothing else going for you. But you cannot outsmart me." Derek reached inside the breast pocket of his expensive tailored jacket. A jacket I knew for a fact he had purchased using stolen funds from my grandfather. He pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded into perfect thirds. With a dramatic flourish, he snapped the paper open and slammed it down flat onto my antique coffee table. The sharp smack of his hand against the wood echoed loudly through the quiet room. He pointed a thick finger at the document, tapping the center of the page with extreme force. "Read it and weep," Derek demanded. "That right there is an official eviction notice, and it is effective immediately." I did not look at the paper. I kept my eyes fixed entirely on Derek, watching the frantic, desperate energy radiating from him. "You see, Erica, my mother might have handled the lease takeover last night, but I am a man of action," Derek boasted, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace. "I do not deal with middlemen. I do not deal with leasing agents." After Barbara told me about this property, I did a little digging online. I found the actual property owner through a real estate portal. A guy who clearly needed liquid cash quickly. I reached out to him directly late last night while you were busy playing mommy. I made him a cash offer to buy this entire estate out from under you. Vanessa, who had been hyperventilating near the doorway, suddenly perked up. She looked at her husband with wide, adoring eyes, completely buying into his delusion. "You bought the house?" she gasped, stepping forward and clutching his arm. "Derek, you bought this mansion." "I absolutely did," Derek said, puffing his chest out even further. "I negotiated a private digital transfer. I bypassed all the red tape, all the useless real estate agents, and all the closing costs. I wired the funds directly to the owner at 3 o'clock this morning. It was a steal. The kind of aggressive business move a spreadsheet-pushing spinster like you could never comprehend. I am a real businessman, Erica. I know how to close a deal, and as the new legal owner of this property, I am telling you to get out." Derek then turned his attention to Grandpa Thomas. He pointed that same aggressive finger at the man who had built our family legacy. "And as for you, old man, you are going right back to that ward where you belong." You are sick in the head, and Erica is exploiting you. In fact, I am putting an end to this right now. Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He held it up high so we could all see the screen as he aggressively punched in the numbers 911. He pressed the phone to his ear, a triumphant, malicious grin spreading across his face. "I am calling the police," Derek announced loudly. "I am reporting a home invasion by a disgruntled former tenant, and while they are here, I am having Erica arrested for trespassing and for severe elder abuse. You kidnapped a dementia patient, Erica. You are going to a federal prison, and that baby of yours is going straight into the foster care system." Vanessa crossed her arms over her chest, nodding along with her husband. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "You brought this on yourself, Erica," she spat. "You should have just packed your bags and left quietly when Mom told you to. Now you are going to lose everything." The emergency operator must have answered the line because Derek straightened his posture and put on his most authoritative voice. "Yes, hello," he spoke into the receiver. "My name is Derek. I need squad cars dispatched to my property immediately. I have intruders in my home refusing to leave. One of them is a highly unstable woman who has kidnapped a vulnerable elderly man. Yes, I am the homeowner. I have the deed right here on my table." Through this entire pathetic display, neither I nor Grandpa Thomas nor Attorney Caldwell had moved a single muscle. We simply stood there and watched a masterclass in self-destruction. I felt a deep, profound sense of peace washing over me. There was no need to argue. There was no need to scream. Attorney Caldwell calmly stepped forward. He did not ask Derek to hang up the phone. He did not try to stop the police from being dispatched. Instead, he slowly reached down and picked up the piece of paper Derek had slammed onto the coffee table. Caldwell adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and held the document up to the natural light streaming through the windows. He read the paper in complete silence for a few long seconds. Then Caldwell let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a rich, booming sound that completely derailed the tension in the room. Derek paused, pulling the phone slightly away from his ear. "What is so funny, you old hack?" Derek snapped, glaring at the lawyer. Caldwell shook his head, still chuckling softly as he looked at the printed page. A digital quitclaim deed downloaded from a generic legal template website. He noted, his voice dripping with professional amusement. How incredibly resourceful. "Tell me, Derek, who exactly did you wire your money to last night?" "I wired it to the owner of record." Derek shot back, his face flushing red with anger. "His name is John Smith. I verified his email address myself." Caldwell lowered the piece of paper and looked directly at Derek. His eyes were cold and sharp. "Let me make sure I understand the brilliant business acumen at play here," Caldwell said, speaking slowly so every single word landed with maximum impact. "You wired $500,000 to a man named John Smith on the internet without using a title company. You bypassed the escrow process. You did not hire an attorney to verify the chain of title. You simply clicked a link and drained your bank accounts based on an email exchange. That is how modern real estate is done," Derek argued, though. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the very first hint of panic. "I bypassed the middleman. It is called disrupting the market. It is called being an absolute fool." Grandpa Thomas interjected, his voice rumbling like thunder. Caldwell calmly reached for his thick, distressed leather briefcase. He popped the latches again and reached inside. He pulled out a heavy, crisp document. It was bound in a blue legal folder and featured a shiny gold state seal stamped prominently on the front page. Caldwell tossed Derek's fake internet deed into the trash can beside the desk and slid the heavy state-sealed document across the coffee table. "Because if you had done a basic title search," Derek Caldwell explained, his tone shifting from amused to completely ruthless, "you would know that there is no landlord. John Smith does not own this property. In fact, no man owns this property." Derek stared at the blue folder on the table. He did not move to pick it up. He just stared at it as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Vanessa slowly uncrossed her arms, all the color draining from her perfectly tanned face. My mother remained frozen, clutching the back of the dining chair, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "Go ahead," Derek Caldwell offered, gesturing to the document. "Read the actual property deed. The one filed with the county clerk. Derek slowly lowered his cell phone, ending the call to the police, without saying another word to the dispatcher. His hand was visibly trembling as he reached out and opened the blue folder. His eyes scanned the heavy legal text, reading the officially recorded details of the estate. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed hard. Erica Caldwell continued speaking clearly, so there was no room for misunderstanding. Purchased this entire estate 3 weeks ago. She paid for it outright in cash. There is no mortgage. There is no lease agreement. She is the sole legal owner of this home and every single inch of the ground it sits on. Derek dropped the folder onto the table. He stumbled backward, bumping into Vanessa. His chest heaved as his brain desperately tried to process the catastrophic reality of what he had just done. "You did not buy a house," Derek Caldwell said, delivering the final crushing blow. "You wired your entire life savings to a scammer on the internet. Your money is gone. It is currently sitting in an offshore account that cannot be traced and cannot be recovered. You threw away $500,000 because you were too arrogant to do a simple background check." Derek stared at the heavy blue folder resting on the antique coffee table. The shiny gold state seal seemed to mock him, catching the morning sunlight and reflecting it right into his terrified eyes. He did not reach for it. He did not need to. The absolute certainty in Attorney Caldwell's voice had already driven the truth straight through Derek's massive, fragile ego. $500,000, his entire life savings, gone. He swallowed hard, a loud gulping sound in the sudden suffocating silence of the living room. "No," Derek muttered, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "No, the portal was secure. I had a confirmation email. The wire transfer was verified." Caldwell simply tilted his head, offering a thin, shark-like smile. "Verified by whom, Derek?" "The phantom you sent your money to. I assure you, whoever John Smith is, he is currently enjoying a very lucrative morning." Derek's hands began to shake. He frantically reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone, his thick fingers tapping aggressively against the glass screen. He was desperate to pull up the email to show Caldwell the supposed proof of his real estate triumph, but his hands were trembling so violently that the device slipped from his grip. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, the screen fracturing into a spiderweb of shattered glass. Derek dropped to his knees, clawing at the broken phone, completely stripped of the conquering general persona he had worn just minutes prior. He looked pathetic. Vanessa, who had been standing frozen near the doorway, finally seemed to process the magnitude of the situation. The color completely drained from her perfectly bronzed face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She stared at her husband groveling on the floor. "Derek," Vanessa said, her voice shaking with a rising hysterical panic. "Derek, what did you do?" He could not look at her. He kept swiping at the shattered phone screen, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I was securing our future V. It was a cash deal. I had to act fast before someone else snatched it up." "What money did you use?" Vanessa shrieked, the volume of her voice shattering the last remnants of peace in the room. "Derek, look at me. Tell me you did not touch the joint investment account." Derek finally looked up, his face slick with a cold sweat. He did not say a word, but the absolute terror in his eyes was answer enough. Vanessa let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. The pristine, unified front of the golden couple shattered instantly. In the blink of an eye, the perfect marriage they constantly paraded in front of the family dissolved into a toxic, violent mess. Vanessa lunged forward and physically shoved Derek hard in the chest, knocking him off balance so he fell backward onto the rug. "You idiot," Vanessa screamed. Her fists balled at her sides. "That was my money. That was our life savings. How could you be so incredibly stupid? You wired $500,000 to a stranger on the internet." Derek scrambled to his feet, trying to defend himself. But Vanessa was relentless. She shoved him again, her perfectly manicured acrylic nails digging into the lapels of his expensive jacket. "We have nothing left," she wailed, tears of pure, selfish panic streaming down her face. "How are we supposed to pay the country club dues? How are we supposed to pay the lease on the cars? You promised me we were moving into a mansion today, and instead you bankrupted us. You are a complete failure." It was a stunning display of absolute chaos. For years, Vanessa and Derek had tormented me. They had mocked my job, my home, and my independence. They had built their entire identities on the illusion of superiority and immense wealth. Now, stripped of their money, they were turning on each other like wild animals in a cage. There was no love between them, only a shared obsession with status. And Derek had just incinerated their status with a single arrogant bank transfer. Barbara watched her golden child unravel in the middle of my living room. My mother's eyes were wide with horror, her chest heaving as she struggled to comprehend the catastrophe unfolding before her. In her twisted reality, Vanessa was perfect, and Derek was the ideal successful son-in-law she had always wanted. She could not psychologically handle the fact that Derek was actually a gullible fool who had just ruined her daughter's life. It fundamentally broke her worldview. So her brain defaulted to its oldest, most deeply ingrained defense mechanism. She blamed me. Barbara violently turned her attention away from the humiliating spectacle of Derek and Vanessa. She marched across the room, her designer heels stomping against the floorboards, and stopped just inches away from me. Her face was contorted with a vicious, desperate fury. She pointed a shaking finger right at my face. "You did this!" Barbara screamed, her voice vibrating with irrational rage. "You set him up!" I did not flinch. I simply looked at her, letting her completely untethered accusations wash over me. "Do not play innocent with me, Erica," she continued, her breathing erratic. "You are an accountant. You know all about these digital transfers and wire frauds. You probably created that fake listing yourself. You intentionally let him get scammed because you are deeply jealous of your sister. You have always hated seeing Vanessa happy, and you orchestrated this entire nightmare to ruin her life." The sheer lunacy of her accusation was almost impressive. She was standing in a house I owned outright, facing a high-profile attorney and a grandfather she had illegally imprisoned, yet she was somehow convincing herself that I had masterminded a cyber heist just to inconvenience her favorite child. "Mom, you are being completely hysterical," I said, my voice low, flat, and completely devoid of the emotional response she was desperately trying to provoke. "I am not hysterical," she shrieked, stepping even closer. "You owe your sister that money. You stole their future, Erica. You need to fix this right now." Barbara gestured frantically around the expansive living room, waving her arms at the high ceilings and the expensive antique furniture. "You own this estate outright. Fine. Then you need to remortgage this house today. You need to pull $500,000 out of your equity and pay Vanessa back right now. It is the absolute least you can do after destroying her family." I stared at my mother, feeling a profound, defining shift in my soul. For 3 decades, this woman had demanded that I set myself on fire to keep Vanessa warm. She had taken my childhood bedroom, my college savings, and my self-esteem, all to feed the insatiable ego of her golden child. And now, standing in the ashes of Derek's monumental stupidity, she was actually demanding that I take out a mortgage on my fully paid-off sanctuary to refund the money her idiot son-in-law had willingly handed to a cybercriminal. She expected me to apologize. She expected me to submit. She expected me to be the same terrified, subservient daughter I had always been. I remained perfectly composed. I did not raise my voice, and I did not engage with her unhinged delusion. Instead, I turned away from her entirely. I walked over to the emerald green wingback chair where Grandpa Thomas was sitting. He had watched the entire screaming match with a look of stoic disgust. I leaned down and gently took baby Leo from my grandfather's arms. The infant stirred slightly, letting out a soft, sleepy sigh before settling his small head against my collarbone. The warmth of my son against my chest grounded me. He was my future, and the screaming woman behind me was nothing more than a toxic relic of my past. I turned back to face my mother. I held Leo securely, my posture relaxed but completely unyielding. I looked Barbara dead in the eye, stripping away the last remnants of the daughter she thought she could control. I did not set Derek up. I said, my voice carrying a quiet, dangerous authority that filled the silent gaps between Vanessa's continued sobbing. Your son-in-law ruined his own life because he was too arrogant to hire a professional. I owe Vanessa absolutely nothing. Barbara opened her mouth to scream another insult, but I cut her off, my tone dropping to a glacial chill. But since we are on the topic of missing money, Mom, where exactly did the $2.5 million from Grandpa's liquid trust accounts go? The silence in the grand living room stretched so thin it threatened to snap. My mother stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed twice before any sound actually came out. The furious red flush that had crawled up her neck suddenly vanished, leaving her skin an unhealthy ashen gray. She gripped the back of the dining chair so tightly her knuckles looked like polished bone. "I do not know what you are talking about," Barbara finally stammered, her voice stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "Every single cent of your grandfather's money is accounted for. His medical care is incredibly expensive, Erica. You have absolutely no idea what it costs to keep a man in his condition safe and comfortable." Comfortable. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. You call a soiled mattress in a state-run facility comfortable. You call chemically lobotomizing your own father with unprescribed sedatives safe. Vanessa stepped forward, her panic temporarily overridden by her greed. "Wait a minute," she interrupted, looking between my mother and me. "What? $2.5 million? Mom, you told us the liquid accounts only had about 400,000 in them. You said the rest of his wealth was tied up in real estate and illiquid assets." My mother shot Vanessa a look that could have melted steel. "Shut up, Vanessa," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Do not engage with her. She is just trying to cause trouble and divide this family." But the damage was already done. The golden facade was fracturing from the inside out. Derek was now staring at my mother, his eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. He might have been a terrible businessman, but he understood the sound of missing millions perfectly well. I did not just rescue Grandpa Thomas. I continued, my voice calm and perfectly steady. I did not just get him sober and safe. When I realized the extent of your medical neglect, I knew I had to look into the finances. You see, Vanessa, you have spent your entire life mocking my career. You called me a spreadsheet-pushing spinster. You told your friends I was just a glorified house flipper who worked a miserable corporate job. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the room. But I am not a house flipper, Vanessa. I am a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest corporate auditing firms in the Midwest. My entire career is built on tracking hidden assets, untangling financial webs, and destroying people who think they are smart enough to steal without leaving a paper trail. And the trail you three left was not just sloppy, it was an insult to my profession. Barbara let out a sharp, nervous laugh, tossing her head back in a desperate attempt to feign amusement. "You are completely delusional," she sneered, trying to regain her footing. "You can call yourself whatever fancy title you want, Erica, but it does not change the facts. I had full legal control of those accounts. The money went to his facility fees, his specialized doctors, and his round-the-clock care. I have receipts for everything." "Really?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Because I happen to have the actual transaction histories right here." I reached into the leather tote bag resting beside my wingback chair. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. The physical weight of the document seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the room. I flipped the folder open. I did not need to read the numbers because I had memorized every single line item over the past 3 months, but the visual impact was absolutely necessary to tear down their delusions. "Let us review your definition of medical care, Mom," I said, running my finger down the first page. On August 14th of last year, a wire transfer of exactly $185,000 was initiated from Grandpa's primary trust account. The memo line simply read, "Medical Transport," but the routing number did not go to a medical transport company or an ambulance service. It went to a luxury European auto dealership downtown. I looked up, locking eyes with my sister. 2 days later, Vanessa, you posted a picture on Instagram of your brand new custom-ordered Porsche 911. You bragged about how Derek's new business venture was paying off. But Derek did not buy you that car, did he? You bought it with the money meant for your grandfather's daily care. Vanessa physically recoiled, raising her hands defensively to her chest. "I did not know," she stammered, her eyes darting frantically toward our mother. "Mom said it was an early inheritance. She said Grandpa wanted me to have a reliable car for the baby." I swear, Erica, I had no idea where it actually came from. You are lying, Vanessa, I stated flatly. The email correspondence I recovered between you and the dealership clearly shows you discussing the best way to title the car to avoid IRS gift tax flags from a trust account. You knew exactly whose money you were spending, and you did not care as long as you looked good at the country club. Vanessa burst into a fresh wave of hysterical tears, covering her face with her hands. Derek rounded on his mother-in-law, his face turning an angry shade of purple. You told me that car was a gift from your personal savings, Barbara, he yelled, his voice cracking with outrage. You told me you were investing in our family. Do not act so deeply offended, Derek, I interrupted, turning a page in the folder. You were the beneficiary of an even larger medical expense. According to these bank records, exactly $450,000 was withdrawn last November. The withdrawal slip claimed it was for experimental cognitive treatments. That is a fascinating medical term for a failing cryptocurrency mining startup. Derek froze, his mouth hanging open. The angry flush drained from his face, leaving him looking completely hollow. The money was routed through 3 different shell companies before landing in the operating account of your LLC. Derek, I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly in the quiet room. You bought hundreds of high-end graphics cards and server racks to mine cryptocurrency. And you managed to bankrupt the entire operation in less than 6 months. You burned nearly $500,000 of stolen money on a tech fad you did not even understand. Derek could not speak. He stared at the floor, his hands shaking visibly. The realization that his ultimate business failure was not just a secret shame, but a documented financial crime was paralyzing him. He had nothing left to say. His fragile ego had been entirely dismantled in front of the 2 women he had been trying to impress. My mother, however, was not ready to surrender. She straightened her posture, jutting her chin out aggressively. She clung to her denial with the desperate grip of a drowning woman. You are throwing a temper tantrum over nothing, Erica. Barbara spat, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. So what if I moved some money around? He is an old man who does not even know what day it is. That money was just sitting there gathering dust while my children needed it. I am the matriarch of this family. I made the executive decision to distribute the wealth where it would actually be appreciated. She took a step forward, pointing her manicured finger at my chest. And you cannot touch us for it. You can wave your little spreadsheets around all you want, but it means absolutely nothing. I was granted full power of attorney. A county judge signed off on my legal guardianship. I had the absolute legal right to manage and distribute those assets however I saw fit. Everything I did was completely approved by the court. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter little girl trying to cause trouble because you have always hated seeing your sister succeed. Barbara crossed her arms tightly across her chest, a victorious smirk returning to her face. She truly believed her own lies. She believed the piece of paper she had manipulated a judge into signing was an impenetrable shield against any consequences. She believed her expensive pantsuit and her country club membership placed her above the law. You cannot do a single thing to me, Erica, my mother sneered. It was perfectly legal. And if you try to take this to court, I will drag your name through the mud so thoroughly you will never work in this city again. I kept my expression perfectly calm. I slowly closed the manila folder and set it down on the coffee table, right next to Derek's worthless internet deed. I did not need to argue the legalities of fiduciary duty or guardianship fraud with a woman who lacked a basic moral compass. I did not need to explain that power of attorney is not a license to loot an estate for personal gain, because I was not the one she needed to worry about anymore. Grandpa Thomas, who had remained seated and perfectly silent during the entire presentation of the financial audit, slowly placed his hands on the armrests of the wingback chair. He pushed himself up to a standing position. His movements were slow, but possessed a terrifying, deliberate strength. He did not look like a frail patient. He looked like the formidable titan of industry he had always been. He stepped around this coffee table, placing himself directly between me and my mother. Barbara was forced to look up into the sharp, unyielding eyes of the father she had betrayed. Actually, Grandpa Thomas said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the complete attention of every person in the room. She can. The sheer force of my grandfather's voice seemed to push the air right out of Barbara's lungs. She stumbled backward another step, her designer heel catching slightly on the edge of the antique Persian rug. She looked small suddenly. The imposing matriarch who had marched into my foyer barking orders and declaring herself the ruler of my home was dissolving before my very eyes. Grandpa Thomas did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The quiet, rumbling intensity of his words held more power than any scream ever could. "You really thought you covered your tracks perfectly, Barbara," Grandpa Thomas said, his eyes narrowing as he stared down at the daughter who had sold him out for a piece of paper and a bank account. "You thought paying off Dr. Evans was the masterstroke of your brilliant plan. You found a physician who was already drowning in malpractice suits, a man so desperate for cash to cover his gambling debts that he was willing to sign a medical evaluation declaring a perfectly healthy man incompetent. You handed him $50,000 in cash from my own safe to write a fictional diagnosis." Barbara's face drained of the last remaining drops of color. Her mouth hung open, but her vocal cords seemed entirely paralyzed. "You dragged me out of my own home in the middle of the night." Grandpa Thomas continued stepping closer, so she was forced to look directly into his eyes. "You told the neighbors I was having a violent episode. You hired private transport, so no actual paramedics would be forced to examine me. And then you locked me in a room that smelled of bleach and decay and instructed the staff to ignore my pleas because it was just the dementia talking. You stole my freedom, Barbara. You stole my dignity. And you did it with a smile on your face because it gave you access to my checkbook." Vanessa let out a loud, ugly sob, burying her face against Derek's shoulder, but Derek was entirely too paralyzed by his own impending doom to offer her any comfort. He stood rigid, his eyes locked on Attorney Caldwell. My mother finally found a fraction of her voice. It was a pathetic, raspy sound, completely devoid of its usual venom. "That is a lie," Barbara whispered, shaking her head frantically. "The doctors examined you. The court examined the paperwork. It was a legal guardianship. I have the signed decree. You cannot just stand here and make up stories to ruin me." Attorney Caldwell stepped forward smoothly, seamlessly taking control of the room with the practiced ease of a predator circling its prey. He reached into the deepest compartment of his distressed leather briefcase. He did not pull out a single sheet of paper. He pulled out 4 thick, heavy binders bound in stark white medical casing. He dropped them onto the coffee table right next to the folder containing my financial audit. The thud of the binders hitting the wood sounded like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. "There are no stories being made up here today," Barbara Attorney Caldwell stated, his tone crisp and entirely devoid of warmth. "What you are looking at are independent, rigorous neurological and psychiatric evaluations. They were conducted over the past 3 months at the premier private medical facility in the state. 4 separate board-certified neurologists have examined your father. They subjected him to every cognitive test, brain scan, and psychological evaluation known to modern medicine." Caldwell tapped the top binder with his index finger. "Their conclusions were unanimous and absolute. Thomas is of completely sound mind. His cognitive functions are in the top percentile for a man of his age. He does not have dementia. He never had dementia. And more importantly, the medical experts have definitively concluded that he was of entirely sound mind 2 years ago when you orchestrated your hostile takeover of his life." Barbara gripped the back of the dining chair so hard her knuckles turned a mottled purplish white. "The court signed off on the guardianship," she repeated, her voice rising in pitch, a desperate mantra of a woman refusing to accept her own demise. "The judge gave me power of attorney. The judge gave me control. You cannot undo a judge's order with a few private doctor visits." Caldwell offered a smile that was completely chilling. It was the smile of a man who held a royal flush and was simply waiting for his opponent to push all their chips into the center of the table. "You are correct that a judge signed the initial order," Caldwell explained, pacing slowly in front of the fireplace. "But a judge signs an order based on the evidence presented to the court. You presented a falsified medical evaluation from Dr. Evans. You intentionally committed perjury. You committed fraud upon the court. And because the foundational document granting you power of attorney was obtained through documented illegal medical fraud, The entire guardianship is rendered null and void ab initio. Vanessa peeked out from behind Derek's shoulder, her tear-streaked face twisted in confusion. Null and void. What does that mean, Derek? She whispered frantically. What is he talking about? Derek did not answer. He just stared at Caldwell, his jaw working silently, as the catastrophic reality began to settle over him. It means, Vanessa Caldwell said, shifting his piercing gaze to my sister, that the power of attorney never legally existed. It means your mother never possessed the lawful authority to manage a single penny of your grandfather's estate. Every signature she put on a bank transfer, every check she wrote, every asset she liquidated, was completely unauthorized. In the eyes of the law, she was not acting as a fiduciary. She was simply a thief. The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees outside the windows. Do you understand the gravity of what I am telling you, Barbara? Caldwell asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Every single dollar you and Vanessa spent over the last 2 years constitutes felony elder financial abuse. Every wire transfer you initiated is federal wire fraud. The liquidation of the estate is grand larceny. Caldwell gestured to the financial audit folder I had left on the table. The luxury sports car sitting in Vanessa's driveway is stolen property. The $500,000 Derek wired to a cybercriminal this morning was stolen property. The hundreds of thousands of dollars you paid for your lavish country club memberships, your spa retreats, and your designer wardrobe were all funded by the proceeds of a massive coordinated felony. The air seemed to completely evacuate the grand living room. Derek stumbled backward until his back hit the wall, sliding down slightly as his legs threatened to give out. He had thought he was a brilliant businessman. Now he was an accessory to federal wire fraud and grand larceny. Vanessa let out a shrill, keening wail, sliding down to sit on the hardwood floor, clutching her knees to her chest. She was weeping loudly, mourning the sudden violent death of her endless checking account. Barbara began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved rapidly, her breath coming in sharp, panicked wheezes. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape route, searching for a loophole, searching for anyone who would validate her delusion. She looked at me standing calmly by my grandfather, holding my beautiful baby boy. She saw the absolute lack of pity in my eyes. She turned to Caldwell, her face contorted into a mask of pure feral desperation. "You are lying!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are trying to scare me. You cannot prove any of this. Dr. Evans would never confess. He would go to jail. He would lose his medical license. He would never talk to you." Caldwell simply adjusted his glasses. "Dr. Evans lost his medical license 6 months ago, Barbara. He is currently cooperating fully with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence regarding his illegal prescription writing operation. He was more than happy to turn over the communications and bank records proving you bribed him." He sang like a canary. Barbara let out a primal scream. It was the sound of a cornered animal realizing the trap had completely snapped shut. She dropped her designer handbag onto the Italian marble floor and frantically began digging through the spilled contents. Designer lipsticks, a gold-plated compact, and a heavy leather wallet scattered across the floor. She finally found her cell phone, her hands shaking so violently she dropped it twice before managing to grip it. "I am calling Arthur!" she screamed, her fingers fumbling over the screen as she desperately tried to unlock the device. "Arthur will destroy you. He is the best defense attorney in the city. I am going to sue you for defamation. I am going to sue you for slander. I am going to sue you for emotional distress. You cannot walk into my house and threaten me. You are all going to pay for this. I will drag you through the courts until you are penniless." She jabbed her finger against the glass screen, holding the phone to her ear with both hands, as if physically trying to force the call to connect. "Arthur," she muttered frantically under her breath. "Pick up the phone, Arthur. Pick up." Attorney Caldwell did not move to stop her. He did not raise his voice to shout over her panicked rambling. Instead, he slowly, casually raised his left arm. He pulled back the crisp cuff of his suit jacket and glanced down at the heavy gold watch strapped to his wrist. He studied the watch face for a long, silent moment. Then a slow, genuinely amused smile spread across his face. I would not bother leaving a voicemail, Barbara attorney Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the quiet ringing of the unanswered phone. Barbara froze, the phone still pressed to her ear. She stared at the lawyer, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a terrifying manic energy. "What did you say?" she hissed. Caldwell lowered his arm and folded his hands neatly in front of him. "I said I would not bother calling Arthur Pendleton. He is currently entirely unavailable to take your call or represent you in any capacity." "Why?" my mother demanded, her voice trembling on the razor edge of a total psychological collapse. "Why is he unavailable?" "Because Arthur Pendleton was arrested for malpractice, extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud yesterday morning," Caldwell stated smoothly. "He was disbarred the moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He is currently sitting in a federal holding cell without bail. It turns out you are not his only client employing his highly illegal strategies to hide stolen assets." The phone slipped from Barbara's sweaty grip, hitting the floor with a loud crack. "And before you think about calling another attorney to try and access the funds you have hoarded," Caldwell added, delivering the final absolute blow, "I should inform you that the federal authorities executed a sweeping asset freeze at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. Every single bank account in your name, every trust you manage, every offshore safety net Arthur set up for you has been completely frozen. You do not have a single dollar to your name, Barbara." My mother collapsed onto her knees beside Vanessa, staring blankly at the shattered screen of her phone. The game was over. The stolen empire had fallen, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to run. The silence in the grand living room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating stillness that follows a catastrophic explosion. No one breathed. No one moved. The reality of federal asset freezes and imminent criminal charges hung in the air like a guillotine waiting to drop. Attorney Caldwell stood by the fireplace, radiating a calm, professional, lethal energy. Grandpa Thomas stood tall and imposing beside me, a silent guardian reclaiming his rightful place in the world. Barbara remained frozen on her knees, staring blindly at the shattered glass of her cell phone, scattered across the Persian rug. The dynasty she thought she had built through manipulation and theft had simply evaporated into dust. Then a sharp, vibrating buzz broke the stillness. It was not Barbara's broken phone on the floor. The sound was coming from Vanessa's designer handbag resting on the antique console table near the entryway. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sound was relentless and irritating, demanding immediate attention. Vanessa scrambled up from the floor, her breath catching in her throat as she practically tore the leather bag open. She pulled out her phone, her eyes wide with a sudden sickening dread as she stared at the glowing screen. Notification after notification flooded her lock screen in rapid succession. American Express Platinum Card declined. Chase Sapphire Reserve Card declined. Capital One Auto Payment rejected. The automatic transactions she had set up to fund her luxury life were hitting a solid, impenetrable brick wall. Her exclusive country club dues, her private personal trainer fees, the massive monthly installment for her newly acquired Porsche, all of it was bouncing back with blaring insufficient funds alerts. Vanessa's perfectly manicured hands began to tremble so violently she nearly dropped the device. She frantically opened her banking app, her face pressing close to the screen, as if proximity might somehow change the digital numbers displaying there. A choked, horrified gasp escaped her throat, echoing loudly in the quiet room. 0.00. Every joint account she shared with Derek, every personal checking account she used for shopping sprees, every high-yield savings account they had supposedly established for their daughters was completely frozen. The balances were locked. The realization hit her with the brutal force of a freight train. She was completely, entirely financially ruined. The illusion of her endless wealth and superiority vanished in the span of 30 agonizing seconds. Vanessa slowly lowered the phone. She turned her head to look at her mother, who was still kneeling on the rug in a state of catatonic shock. The sheer terror in Vanessa's eyes instantly morphed into a raw, vicious hatred. The unified front they had maintained to torment me for years dissolved completely. There is no loyalty among thieves, especially when the loot suddenly disappears. You told me it was an early inheritance! Vanessa screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet room like jagged glass. You told me that money was clean. Barbara flinched as if she had been physically struck across the face. She looked up at her golden child, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound managed to escape her throat. The imposing matriarch had been reduced to a shivering shell of a woman. You ruined my life! Vanessa shrieked, closing the distance between them and pointing a shaking manicured finger directly in her mother's face. You dragged me into a federal crime. You made me buy that car with stolen money. How could you do this to me? I trusted you. I believed you were taking care of the family, and instead you turned me into an accomplice. You are a monster. The absolute hypocrisy of Vanessa's outrage was astounding to witness. She had never once questioned the source of her sudden luxury. She had never asked how a retired man could afford to buy her luxury sports cars while allegedly requiring round-the-clock intensive medical care in a specialized facility. She had happily spent every single stolen dime without a second thought, parading her ill-gotten wealth in front of her friends and family. But now, faced with the terrifying reality of federal consequences, she turned on her mother with the ferocity of a starving animal. Barbara raised a trembling hand, trying desperately to reach out to her daughter. Vanessa, please, Barbara whispered, her voice a pathetic broken croak. I did it for you. I wanted you to have the best. I wanted you to have the life you deserved. Do not touch me! Vanessa spat violently, slapping her mother's hand away. You did it for yourself. You wanted to feel powerful. You wanted to play the grand, wealthy matriarch, and now I am going to lose everything because of your arrogant stupidity. I am going to lose my beautiful house. I am going to lose my friends at the club. I am going to go to federal prison. Vanessa spun away from her mother, her chest heaving as pure, unadulterated panic completely consumed her. She looked wildly over at Derek, who was still slumped against the far wall, staring blankly at the baseboards. He was utterly useless, paralyzed by his own financial failures and impending legal ruin. He offered no solutions, no comfort, no brilliant escape route. He was just another sinking weight tied to her ankles. Vanessa was completely cornered. She realized with terrifying clarity that the only two people in the room holding any actual power were the grandfather she had cruelly neglected and the sister she had relentlessly bullied for 3 decades. Vanessa's eyes locked onto me. The vicious, screaming anger melted away in an instant, replaced by a sickeningly sweet, desperate manipulation. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times before, whenever she needed something she could not get herself. She stumbled across the room, her knees hitting the hardwood floor just a few feet from where I stood holding baby Leo. Erica, Vanessa cried, clasping her hands together in front of her chest in a gesture of frantic prayer. Erica, please. You have to help me. You have to tell them I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I did not know about the fake medical evaluations. I did not know about the disbarred lawyer. I am just a mother trying to raise her kids. You know I am not smart enough to pull off a financial crime. Please tell the lawyer I am innocent. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication, no residual sisterly loyalty. I felt a profound, echoing emptiness where my affection for her had once resided. She was a stranger to me now, just a toxic element I was finally excising from my life. Vanessa took my silence as an opening. She crawled forward on her knees, reaching out to grasp the hem of my long cardigan. We have nowhere to go, Erica, she wailed, thick, dark tears of mascara streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. The banks are going to foreclose on our house today. They are going to repossess my cars. We have absolutely nothing left in the world. You have to let us stay here. You own this huge estate outright. You have plenty of room. We can move into the guest wing until we get back on our feet. You will not even know we are here, I promise. I took a deliberate step backward, smoothly pulling my cardigan out of her frantic grasp. I adjusted baby Leo in my arms, holding him securely against my chest. He was peaceful, entirely insulated from the chaos unfolding around him. You are not moving into my house, Vanessa, I said, my voice quiet but laced with absolute finality. You cannot do this to me, Vanessa screamed, her desperation turning frantic and aggressive. We are sisters, Erica. We are blood. You have millions of dollars now. You have Grandpa's entire estate to manage. You cannot just leave me out on the cold street. Think of your nieces, Erica. Think of Chloe and Madison. Where are they going to sleep tonight? How can you be so incredibly heartless to your own flesh and blood nieces? She was weaponizing her children, using them as human shields to protect herself from the severe consequences of her own boundless greed. She expected me to crumble at the very mention of the little girls. She expected me to revert to the subservient people-pleasing sister who always sacrificed her own peace and stability to clean up Vanessa's disastrous messes. But she was speaking to a ghost. That submissive version of Erica had died the moment I walked into that state-run facility and found out they had locked my grandfather in a chemically induced nightmare. I looked down at the sister who had tormented me, mocked my career, and actively tried to steal my future. I felt Grandpa Thomas step up right beside me, his solid presence an unyielding wall of support. I looked from Vanessa's tear-streaked, heavily ruined face over to Derek, who was finally pulling himself up from the floor, leaning heavily against the expensive wallpaper for physical support. "Derek," I said, projecting my voice so it carried clearly and sharply across the expansive room. Derek flinched violently, his eyes darting toward me with the terrified look of a man expecting a physical blow. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat as he waited for my final judgment. "Before you start unpacking your imaginary bags in my guest room," I continued, my tone completely conversational, but utterly lethal. "I have a quick question about your personal finances." Derek froze completely. Vanessa stopped her hysterical crying, looking back and forth between her husband and me with a sudden dawning confusion. "During my forensic audit of your highly unsuccessful business accounts, I found a recurring monthly charge that did not quite match up with your supposed cryptocurrency mining operations," I explained, watching the last remnants of blood completely drain from Derek's pale face. It was a very consistent wire transfer. $4,500 paid exactly on the first of every single month directly to a luxury property management firm located in the upscale art district. Derek opened his mouth, but no sound managed to come out. He raised his trembling hands, shaking his head frantically, silently pleading with me to stop talking. But I was not stopping. The truth had finally breached the massive dam they had built, and it was going to wash all of their lies away completely. I was scorching the earth. I looked back down at my sister, who was staring up at me with wide, uncomprehending, terrified eyes. "So my final question is this," I said, dropping my voice to a glacial, unforgiving chill. "Does Vanessa know about your second apartment downtown, Derek? The luxury penthouse loft you secretly rent under a shell corporate LLC for a woman named Jasmine." The silence in the room was no longer just heavy. It was explosive. Vanessa stopped breathing entirely. Her tear-streaked face twisted into a grotesque mask of confusion and horror as her brain struggled to process the words I had just spoken. The name Jasmine hung in the stagnant air of the foyer, a toxic cloud that poisoned the last remaining delusion she held on to. Jasmine. Vanessa repeated the word, sounding foreign and harsh on her tongue. "Who is Jasmine?" Derek took a step backward, his hands held up in front of him as if he could physically push the truth back into my mouth. "Erica, stop," he pleaded, his voice breaking into a high, panicked squeak. "Do not do this. You are misunderstanding the paperwork. It is a corporate lease. It is for a business consultant. It is a tax write-off." "You really should have hired a better accountant, Derek," I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic lies with absolute precision. I reached into my leather tote bag one final time. I pulled out a thick, stapled document with several key paragraphs highlighted in bright neon yellow. I did not hand it to him. I tossed it effortlessly through the air. The heavy packet landed squarely on the antique rug right at Vanessa's knees. "That is a signed luxury residential lease agreement," I explained, watching Vanessa slowly drop her gaze to the pages resting by her designer shoes. "The lease is for a penthouse unit in the Pearl District. The monthly rent is exactly $4,500. The tenant listed on the residency agreement is Jasmine Brooks, but the guarantor, The man who signed the financial liability clause and provided the routing number for the automatic monthly payments is Derek. And the routing number he provided traces directly back to the Shell Corporation, funded entirely by Grandpa Thomas's stolen trust account. Vanessa's hands began to shake with a violent, uncontrollable tremor. She reached down and picked up the document. Her manicured nails scraped against the paper as she flipped to the signature page. She saw her husband's distinctive scrawl resting right on the dotted line. She saw the dates. She saw the total amounts paid out over the last 24 months. Over $100,000. $100,000 of stolen money funneled into a secret apartment for another woman, while Vanessa was maxing out credit cards to maintain her illusion of high society superiority. "You have been funding a mistress with my grandfather's money," Vanessa whispered, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, dangerous edge. "You told me our accounts were tight because of your investments. You told me I needed to be patient while your startup generated revenue. You have been sleeping with another woman for 2 years in a penthouse paid for by the money that is going to send me to federal prison." "Vanessa, honey, please listen to me," Derek begged, taking another desperate step backward toward the massive double doors of the foyer. "It meant absolutely nothing. She was a mistake. I was stressed. I was under so much pressure trying to provide the lifestyle you demanded. You are always so demanding, Vanessa. It was just an escape." It was the absolute worst thing he could have possibly said. Blaming his 2-year affair on his wife's demands was the final spark needed to ignite the powder keg. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling scream. It was not a cry of sorrow or betrayal. It was a guttural primal shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. The pristine golden child, the woman who spent hours perfectly styling her hair and selecting the exact shade of lipstick to project flawless elegance, completely snapped. She threw the lease agreement directly at his face and lunged forward. She cleared the distance between them with the speed of a striking viper. Her hands clawed forward, grabbing fistfuls of his expensive tailored suit jacket. She shoved him backward with a shocking amount of physical force. "You lying, pathetic piece of garbage!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and vibrating against the glass of the front windows. "You ruined my life. You humiliated me. I am going to lose everything because of you. I am going to jail because of you." Derek scrambled backward, trying desperately to break her grip. "Vanessa, stop it!" he yelled, raising his arms to shield his face as she began slapping wildly at his chest and shoulders. "You are crazy! Get off me!" Derek twisted his body violently, managing to tear himself out of her grasp. The fabric of his suit jacket ripped with a loud, sharp sound. He turned and made a frantic, desperate dash toward the front door. He wanted to escape the house, to escape his enraged wife, to escape the crushing reality of his total destruction. But he forgot about the massive stack of heavy cardboard moving boxes he had arrogantly hauled into my foyer just 30 minutes earlier. Derek's expensive Italian leather loafer caught the edge of the bottom box. He pitched forward, his arms flailing wildly in the air. He crashed hard into the tower of boxes, sending them tumbling to the floor in a chaotic avalanche of packing tape and cardboard. Derek hit the ground face first with a heavy, sickening thud. He let out a loud groan, clutching his face as he rolled over onto his back. Vanessa did not stop. She was a woman possessed by the absolute certainty of her own ruin. She stepped over the fallen boxes and kicked him hard in the thigh. "You coward!" she screamed, her face red and contorted with fury. "Stand up and look at me. You stole my future." Barbara remained frozen on the floor nearby, completely paralyzed by the horrific spectacle unfolding in front of her. She watched her golden daughter shrieking and kicking like a wild animal. She watched her supposedly brilliant, successful son-in-law cowering on the floor, bleeding slightly from a cut on his forehead caused by his own moving boxes. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy, superior family was completely and utterly obliterated. The mask had not just slipped, it had been ripped off and smashed into 1,000 jagged pieces. There was no wealth. There was no superiority. There was only greed, theft, lies, and a spectacular violent collapse. I stood quietly beside Grandpa Thomas, holding Leo safely against my chest. We watched the destruction of the Golden family without a single ounce of pity. They had built their entire identities on the foundation of my subjugation. They had expected me to quietly accept my role as their financial safety net and emotional punching bag forever. They had marched into my home, intending to throw me out onto the street and take everything I had worked my entire life to build. And now, they were tearing each other apart in the exact spot where they had planned to conquer me. Grandpa Thomas looked down at his daughter and his granddaughter. His face was a mask of stoic, sorrowful justice. "This is what greed buys you," Barbara Grandpa Thomas said, his voice cutting clearly through Vanessa's hysterical screaming. "You traded your soul for a lifestyle you could not afford. You surrounded yourself with liars and fools because they told you what you wanted to hear. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, but you were just the most corrupt. And now you get to live in the ruins of the house you burned down." Barbara slowly raised her head, looking at her father with blank, vacant eyes. She had no retorts left. She had no threats left to make. The disbarred lawyer and the frozen bank accounts had stripped away her armor, leaving her completely defenseless against the absolute truth. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A bright, pulsing light sliced through the gloomy tension of the foyer. The harsh, alternating flashes of red and blue bounced off the antique mirrors and danced wildly across the high, vaulted ceilings. The flashing lights were coming from the massive front windows. I glanced toward the glass. 3 police cruisers had just pulled to a sharp, aggressive stop in my circular driveway, blocking the exit completely. The heavy doors of the cruisers swung open, and uniformed officers began stepping out onto the pavement. Heavy, authoritative knocks echoed through the house, vibrating against the solid oak of the front doors. Derek scrambled to a sitting position, pushing away a crushed cardboard box. He saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting through the glass panes of the door. A sudden, desperate wave of relief washed over his bleeding face. He pointed a shaking finger toward the entrance. "The police?" Derek gasped, his breath coming in ragged, heaving pants. He looked up at Vanessa and then shot a venomous, triumphant glare at me. "I called them 30 minutes ago to report a trespasser. I told them you were refusing to vacate my property. They are here to throw you out, Erica. You are going to jail." Derek pushed himself up off the floor, wincing as he put weight on his bruised leg. He stumbled toward the heavy oak doors, acting like a rescued man swimming toward a lifeboat. He reached out and grabbed the brass handle, throwing the door open wide to greet the officers standing on my front porch. "Officer, thank God you are here!" Derek shouted, pointing back over his shoulder at me. "This woman is trespassing. My mother-in-law owns this property, and this woman is refusing to leave. She is becoming violent. You need to arrest her immediately and remove her from our home." 4 uniformed police officers stepped over the threshold into my foyer. They did not look at me. They did not look at Grandpa Thomas. Their eyes locked immediately onto Derek, Vanessa, and Barbara. They moved with a swift, coordinated precision, spreading out to secure the room. 2 men in sharp, dark suits followed closely behind the uniformed officers. They wore federal badges clipped securely to their belts and carried thick black folders tucked under their arms. Attorney Caldwell stepped forward smoothly, intercepting Derek's frantic, desperate demands. Caldwell adjusted his suit jacket and offered Derek a smile that contained zero warmth and absolute legal certainty. "I believe there has been a slight misunderstanding regarding the nature of this particular emergency response," Derek Attorney Caldwell said, his voice echoing clearly over the flashing lights and the radio static coming from the open door. "These officers are indeed responding to a call regarding this address. However, they are no longer responding to the frivolous trespassing complaint you initiated earlier this morning. That call was canceled by the dispatch center after a highly illuminating conversation with the district attorney's office." Derek froze, his hand still resting on the brass door handle. The frantic relief completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He looked at the federal agent standing in the center of the foyer and then back at Attorney Caldwell. "What are you talking about?" Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why are they here?" Caldwell turned to face my mother and my sister, who were both staring in frozen, terrified silence at the police officers securing the exits. "They are here to execute multiple high-level arrest warrants," Caldwell stated, his words landing like heavy stones in the quiet room. "Following the immediate freezing of your financial assets this morning, The federal authorities and the local Major Crimes Division formally issued warrants for the arrest of Barbara, Vanessa, and Derek. The charges include felony elder financial abuse conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and federal wire fraud. One of the federal agents stepped forward, opening the black folder he carried. Barbara, Vanessa, and Derek the agent, said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of the United States government. "You are all under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The metal handcuffs clinked loudly as the officers unclipped them from their belts. The sound was sharp and definitive, echoing the final, terrifying reality of their situation. The house of cards had not just collapsed, it had been completely, absolutely destroyed, and there was no one left to save them. The officers moved forward without hesitation. Two uniforms flanked Derek, pulling his arms firmly behind his back. Derek offered no resistance. His shoulders slumped forward, his head dropping in total defeat as the cold steel locked tightly around his wrists. He was crying silently, the tears mixing with the small trickle of blood on his forehead. Vanessa backed away until she hit the console table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. "No," she whimpered, shaking her head side to side as a female officer approached her. "No, you cannot do this. I am a mother. I have daughters. I did not do anything wrong. I just spent the money my mother gave me. You have to arrest her, not me." The officer ignored her frantic pleas, swiftly turning Vanessa around and securing her wrists behind her back. Vanessa let out a long, desperate wail, crying out for her mother, crying out for Derek, crying out to anyone who would listen. But the room offered no sympathy. Barbara did not move. She remained seated on the floor amidst the scattered contents of her designer purse. She looked at the handcuffs being secured around her wrists with a blank, uncomprehending stare. The powerful, wealthy matriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist for decades was gone. In her place was a broken criminal facing the absolute devastation of her own arrogant choices. I stood beside my grandfather watching the police escort my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law out the front door and into the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting cruisers. The driveway that was supposed to be the staging ground for my eviction had become the stage for their total ruin. I held Leo closer, kissing the top of his head, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over my home. The storm was finally over. The name hung in the dead air of my foyer, like a toxic cloud. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Vanessa stopped breathing entirely. Her tear-streaked face twisted into a grotesque mask of confusion and horror as her brain struggled to process the syllables I had just spoken. "Jasmine." She repeated the word, letting it roll over her tongue as if trying to decipher a foreign language. "Who is Jasmine?" Derek took a panicked step backward. He held his hands up in front of his chest, palms facing outward, as if he could physically push the truth back into my mouth. "Erica, stop," he pleaded, his voice breaking into a high-pitched, frantic squeak. "Do not do this. You are misunderstanding the paperwork. It is a corporate lease. It is for a business consultant. It is a tax write-off for the tech company. Vanessa, honey, please do not listen to her. She is just trying to tear our marriage apart because she is jealous." "You really should have hired a better accountant, Derek," I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic, frantic lies with absolute surgical precision. I reached into my leather tote bag one final time. I bypassed the bank statements and the wire transfer receipts. Instead, I pulled out a thick, stapled document from my audit files. I had taken the liberty of using a bright neon yellow marker to highlight the most relevant paragraphs. I did not hand the document to him. I did not hand it to my mother. I simply tossed it effortlessly through the air. The heavy packet landed squarely on the antique Persian rug right at Vanessa's knees. "That is a signed luxury residential lease agreement," I explained, watching Vanessa slowly drop her gaze to the pages resting by her expensive designer shoes. "The lease is for a penthouse unit in the Pearl District. The monthly rent is exactly $4,500. The tenant listed on the residency agreement is Jasmine Brooks. But the guarantor, the man who signed the financial liability clause and provided the routing number for the automatic monthly payments, is Derek. And the routing number he provided traces directly back to the shell corporation funded entirely by Grandpa Thomas's stolen trust account. Vanessa's hands began to shake with a violent, uncontrollable tremor. She reached down and picked up the document. Her manicured acrylic nails scraped against the crisp paper as she flipped to the signature page. She saw her husband's distinctive scrawl resting right on the dotted line. She saw the dates. She saw the total amounts paid out over the last 24 months. Over $100,000, I stated, ensuring the number echoed clearly off the high vaulted ceilings. $100,000 of stolen money funneled into a secret apartment for another woman while you were maxing out credit cards to maintain your illusion of high society superiority. You have been funding a mistress with my grandfather's money, Vanessa whispered, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, dangerous edge. She did not look at me. Her eyes were locked onto the man she had paraded in front of our family for years as the ultimate prize. You told me our accounts were tight because of your aggressive investments. You told me I needed to be patient while your startup generated revenue. You canceled my winter trip to Aspen because you said cash flow was tied up in server racks. You have been sleeping with another woman for 2 years in a penthouse paid for by the money that is going to send me to federal prison. Vanessa, honey, please listen to me, Derek begged, taking another desperate step backward toward the massive double doors of the foyer. It meant absolutely nothing. She was a mistake. I was stressed. I was under so much pressure trying to provide the incredible lifestyle you demanded. You are always so demanding, Vanessa. It was just an escape. It was the absolute worst thing he could have possibly said. Blaming his 2-year meticulously funded affair on his wife's demands was the final spark needed to ignite the powder keg. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling scream. It was not a cry of sorrow or betrayal. It was a guttural, primal shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. The pristine golden child, the woman who spent hours perfectly styling her hair and selecting the exact shade of lipstick to project flawless elegance, completely snapped. She threw the heavy lease agreement directly at his face and lunged forward. She cleared the distance between them with the terrifying speed of a striking viper. Her hands clawed forward, grabbing fistfuls of his expensive tailored suit jacket. She shoved him backward with a shocking amount of physical force, driving her fists into his chest. "You lying, pathetic piece of garbage!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and vibrating against the glass of the front windows. "You ruined my life. You humiliated me. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of my own sister. I am going to lose everything because of you. I am going to jail because of you." Derek scrambled backward, trying desperately to break her iron grip. "Vanessa, stop it!" he yelled, raising his arms to shield his face as she began slapping wildly at his chest and shoulders. "You are crazy! Get off me!" Derek twisted his body violently, managing to tear himself out of her grasp. The fabric of his suit jacket ripped with a loud, sharp sound, the seam completely tearing away from the shoulder. He turned and made a frantic, desperate dash toward the front door. He wanted to escape the house, to escape his enraged wife, to escape the crushing reality of his total destruction. But in his blind panic, Derek forgot about the massive stack of heavy cardboard moving boxes he had arrogantly hauled into my foyer just 30 minutes earlier. The very boxes he had brought to pack up my belongings and evict me from my own home were now his undoing. Derek's expensive Italian leather loafer caught the edge of a heavy wardrobe box. He pitched forward, his arms flailing wildly in the empty air as he completely lost his balance. He crashed hard into the towering stack, sending the heavy boxes tumbling to the floor in a chaotic avalanche of packing tape and rigid cardboard. The sharp corner of a box clipped his forehead as he went down. Derek hit the ground face first with a heavy, sickening thud. He let out a loud groan, clutching his face as he rolled over onto his back. Vanessa did not stop. She was a woman possessed by the absolute certainty of her own ruin. She stepped right over the fallen boxes and kicked him hard in the thigh. "You coward!" she screamed, her face red and contorted with fury. "Stand up and look at me! You stole my future! You gave my money to some cheap girl downtown! I will kill you, Derek!" Barbara remained frozen on the floor nearby, completely paralyzed by the horrific spectacle unfolding in front of her. She watched her golden daughter shrieking and kicking like a wild animal. She watched her supposedly brilliant, successful son-in-law cowering on the floor, bleeding slightly from a cut on his forehead caused by his own moving boxes. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy, superior family was completely and utterly obliterated in the middle of my foyer. The mask had not just slipped, it had been violently ripped off and smashed into 1,000 jagged pieces. There was no wealth. There was no superiority. There was only greed, theft, lies, and a spectacular violent collapse. They were fighting, crying, and turning on each other like wild animals trapped in a cage of their own making. I stood quietly beside Grandpa Thomas, holding Leo safely against my chest. We watched the destruction of the Golden family without a single ounce of pity. They had built their entire identities on the foundation of my subjugation. They had expected me to quietly accept my role as their financial safety net and emotional punching bag forever. They had marched into my home intending to throw me out onto the street and take everything I had worked my entire life to build, and now they were tearing each other apart in the exact spot where they had planned to conquer me. Grandpa Thomas looked down at his daughter and his granddaughter. His face was a mask of stoic, sorrowful justice. He did not say a word to intervene. He simply watched the consequences of their actions catch up to them all at once. Suddenly, the chaotic atmosphere in the room shifted. A bright, pulsing light sliced through the gloomy tension of the foyer. The harsh, alternating flashes of red and blue bounced off the antique mirrors and danced wildly across the high, vaulted ceilings. The flashing lights were coming from the massive front windows, illuminating the entire front lawn and the circular driveway. 3 police cruisers had just pulled to a sharp, aggressive stop in front of my house, blocking the exit completely. The heavy doors of the cruisers swung open, and uniformed officers began stepping out onto the pavement. Heavy, authoritative knocks echoed through the house, vibrating against the solid oak of the front doors. Derek scrambled to a sitting position, pushing away a crushed cardboard box. He saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting through the glass panes of the door. A sudden, desperate wave of relief washed over his bleeding face. The panic in his eyes was instantly replaced by a vicious, triumphant arrogance. He pointed a shaking finger toward the entrance. "The police!" Derek gasped, his breath coming in ragged, heaving pants. He looked up at Vanessa and then shot a venomous, victorious glare directly at me. "I called them 30 minutes ago to report a trespasser. I knew you would not leave quietly. I told them you were refusing to vacate my property. They are here to throw you out, Erica. You are going to be marched out of here in handcuffs. You are going to jail." Derek pushed himself up off the floor, wincing as he put weight on his bruised leg. He stumbled toward the heavy oak doors, acting like a rescued man swimming toward a lifeboat. He smoothed down his torn suit jacket, wiping a smear of blood from his forehead as he reached out and grabbed the brass handle, throwing the door open wide to greet the officers standing on my front porch. "Officer, thank God you are here!" Derek shouted, his chest puffing out with unwarranted authority. He pointed back over his shoulder at me. "This woman is trespassing. My mother-in-law owns this property, and this woman is refusing to leave. She is becoming violent and erratic. You need to arrest her immediately and remove her from our home." 4 uniformed police officers stepped over the threshold into my foyer. They did not look at me. They did not look at Grandpa Thomas. Their eyes locked immediately onto Derek, Vanessa, and Barbara. They moved with a swift, coordinated precision, spreading out to secure the room. 2 men in sharp, dark suits followed closely behind the uniformed officers. They wore federal badges clipped securely to their belts and carried thick black folders tucked under their arms. Attorney Caldwell stepped forward smoothly, intercepting Derek's frantic, desperate demands. Caldwell adjusted his suit jacket and offered Derek a smile that contained zero warmth and absolute legal certainty. "I believe there has been a slight misunderstanding regarding the nature of this particular emergency response," Derek Attorney Caldwell said, his voice echoing clearly over the flashing lights and the radio static coming from the open door. "These officers are indeed responding to a call regarding this address. However, they are no longer responding to the frivolous trespassing complaint you initiated earlier this morning. Derek froze, his hand still resting on the brass door handle. The frantic relief completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He looked at the federal agent standing in the center of the foyer, and then back at Attorney Caldwell. "What do you mean they are not responding to my call?" Derek whispered, his voice trembling. "I am the one who called them." Caldwell simply shook his head. "Your call was canceled by the dispatch center after a highly illuminating conversation with the district attorney's office. The police are here for a completely different reason." The cold evening air swept into the grand foyer through the massive open double doors. The aggressive red and blue lights of the police cruisers splashed across the pristine white walls of my home, painting a chaotic scene. Two uniformed officers gripped my mother tightly by her arms, Frog marching her across the threshold and out onto the front porch. Barbara dug the heels of her expensive designer pumps into the custom stonework, violently resisting the inevitable. She twisted her body, screaming demands and threats that had lost all their power. The spectacle did not end at the edge of my property. Our upscale neighborhood had always prided itself on quiet discretion, but the sheer volume of the police presence had drawn an audience. I stepped closer to the open doorway, watching as doors up and down the manicured street swung open. Mrs. Gable from the estate across the street stood at the end of her driveway, clutching her cashmere wrap tightly around her shoulders, staring in absolute shock. The Millers next door had actually stepped out onto their manicured lawn, their phones raised to capture the downfall of the woman who had spent years treating them like peasants. Barbara realized she had an audience. The color completely drained from her face, leaving a sickly gray pallor behind her ruined makeup. She stopped fighting the officers, lowering her head in a futile attempt to hide her face from the very people she had endlessly sought to impress. The golden matriarch of the family was being hauled away in handcuffs, a disgraced criminal paraded in full view of the high society she worshipped. The heavy door of the police cruiser slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate with a resonant metallic thud. Inside the foyer, the attention of the remaining federal agents and local police instantly shifted back to Derek and Vanessa. Attorney Caldwell stepped forward, adjusting his glasses with a calm, predatory grace. "The elder abuse and grand larceny charges regarding Thomas's estate are just the beginning of your legal troubles," Derek Caldwell stated, his voice carrying a lethal crispness. "The financial investigators have already flagged the routing numbers you used to fund your downtown penthouse. It appears the shell corporations you utilized for your cryptocurrency startup are deeply entangled in federal wire fraud and tax evasion. The SEC will be very eager to speak with you regarding the phantom investors you claim to have on your payroll." Derek's eyes widened so far I thought they might pop out of his skull. The sheer terror of federal financial investigators dismantling his fraudulent business piece by piece completely shattered his mind. He knew the estate fraud was terrible, but the corporate fraud was his entire life's work of deception. He was facing decades in a federal penitentiary. An officer stepped forward, reaching for his utility belt to retrieve a second pair of handcuffs. "Derek, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, stepping into Derek's personal space. Derek did not comply. A sudden, primal survival instinct overrode any remaining shred of rational thought. He let out a panicked, breathless gasp and violently shoved his shoulder directly into the officer's chest. The sudden impact knocked the officer off balance, sending him crashing hard into my antique entryway console table. A heavy crystal vase shattered onto the hardwood floor with a deafening crash. Derek did not hesitate. He spun around and sprinted frantically toward the open front doors. He shoved past a second stunned officer, leaping down the porch stairs 3 at a time. "Hey, stop right there!" the recovering officer shouted, drawing his weapon and sprinting out the door in hot pursuit. Derek bolted across the illuminated lawn, his torn suit jacket flapping wildly behind him. He did not look back at the house. He did not look back at the police cruisers. Most importantly, he did not look back at his wife. He abandoned Vanessa entirely, leaving her to face the catastrophic fallout of their shared crimes, while he sprinted blindly down the affluent street, disappearing into the dark shadows of the neighborhood. The remaining officers immediately rushed out the door, chasing him into the night, their radios crackling loudly with urgent requests for backup. The sudden exodus of law enforcement left the grand foyer eerily quiet. Attorney Caldwell calmly closed the heavy double doors, shutting out the flashing lights and the frantic shouts of the police chase. He turned to face the center of the room. Vanessa was left completely alone. She sat collapsed on the cold hardwood floor, surrounded by the scattered remnants of her shattered reality. Her massive collection of expensive designer luggage was piled haphazardly around her. The Louis Vuitton trunks, the Prada garment bags, the Gucci weekenders they had hauled inside to claim their new conquered territory now looked like a barricade of absolute absurdity. She looked up at the closed front doors, her chest heaving with ragged, panicked breaths. Her husband had just violently shoved a police officer and run away like a cowardly thief. Her mother was locked in the back of a police cruiser facing federal charges. Her bank accounts were frozen solid. Her credit cards were entirely useless. The golden child, the sister who had spent 3 decades sneering at me and treating me like garbage, was utterly destitute. Grandpa Thomas looked down at her with a heavy, sorrowful expression. He did not offer a word of comfort. He simply turned his back to her, resting a gentle hand on my shoulder before walking slowly toward the grand staircase. He had seen enough betrayal for one lifetime. Vanessa watched him walk away, her bottom lip trembling violently. She was truly isolated. The silence in the room pressed down on her, forcing her to acknowledge the undeniable truth. She had no wealth. She had no superiority. She had no allies. She slowly turned her tear-streaked face toward me. I stood perfectly still, rocking Leo gently in my arms, maintaining a completely blank, unreadable expression. I felt no pity. I felt no residual sibling loyalty. The well of my empathy had dried up completely regarding the people in this room. Vanessa shifted her weight onto her hands and knees. The woman who refused to wear anything off the rack, the woman who insisted on taking private cars to avoid mingling with the general public, began to literally crawl across my hardwood floor. Her expensive silk skirt dragged against the wood, collecting dust as she scrambled forward. "Erica," she whimpered, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "Erica, please, you have to listen to me." She closed the distance between us, reaching out with trembling hands to hover just inches from my shoes. She looked up at me, her face contorted into a mask of pure terror and supplication. "He left me, Erica." Vanessa sobbed, heavy tears dripping from her chin onto the polished wood. "Derek left me. He took all the money and ran. Mom dragged me into this insane fraud, and now she is gone. The banks have taken everything. They are going to take my house. I have absolutely nothing left in the world." I looked down at her, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "That sounds like a significant personal problem, Vanessa. Please," she begged, clasping her hands together in front of her chest. "I am terrified, Erica. I do not know what to do. I do not know where to go. You cannot turn me away. We are blood. We grew up together. You are my sister. You are the only family I have left in the world. I just need a loan. Just a little bit of money to get by until I can contact a lawyer and figure out this horrible mess." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the floor in a dramatic display of total submission. "Just give me enough for a hotel for a month," Vanessa pleaded, her voice muffled against the wood. "Just enough to keep a roof over my head. You have millions. It is nothing to you. Please have a heart." I stared down at the top of her perfectly highlighted hair. Her words brought a very specific memory rushing back to the forefront of my mind. A memory she had clearly completely discarded as irrelevant. I remembered standing in the cramped hallway of our old house, holding 2 black garbage bags filled with every single item I owned in the world. I was 18 years old. I had just finished packing because my mother had informed me I was no longer welcome in the house. Vanessa needed my bedroom to expand her wardrobe space. Vanessa had wanted a massive walk-in closet to store her excessive shoe collection, and my mother had immediately obliged, throwing her youngest daughter out onto the street to accommodate a closet. I remembered begging for a week to find an apartment. I remembered asking for a small loan just to cover a security deposit. And I remembered the cold, casual way they had both looked at me before shutting the door in my face. I shifted Leo carefully into my left arm, supporting his head against my shoulder. I reached my right hand deep into the pocket of my cardigan. I felt the crisp paper edges resting there. I pulled my hand out, holding two crisp $100 bills. I held them loosely between my fingers, letting them catch the light from the chandelier overhead. Vanessa looked up, her eyes widening with a sudden desperate flash of hope as she saw the cash. She reached her hands out, palms up, ready to accept her salvation. I did not hand the money to her. I simply opened my fingers. The two crisp bills fluttered slowly through the air, landing softly on the hardwood floor right in front of her reaching hands. Here I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "That is exactly $200. Vanessa stared at the money resting on the floor, a profound confusion twisting her features. $200, she whispered, looking up at me. Erica, that will not even cover one night at a decent hotel. What am I supposed to do with this? I looked directly into her tear-filled eyes, delivering my final absolute judgment. That is the exact amount Mom handed me when she kicked me out at 18, so you could have my bedroom to use as a walk-in closet, I stated, the memory adding a razor-sharp edge to my words. Figure it out. I turned my back on her, leaving her kneeling on the floor, staring down at the two bills. I walked slowly toward the staircase, leaving the ruined remnants of my former family behind me for good. Vanessa stared at the two bills resting on the floor as if they were venomous snakes. The shock paralyzing her vocal cords shattered, replaced by a sudden volatile surge of absolute fury. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the money completely, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished wood. She refused to touch the cash. The very idea that she was being offered a pathetic $200 while I stood in a multi-million-dollar estate was an insult her fragile ego simply could not process. "You are a psychopath," Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking as it echoed off the high ceiling. "You are a cold, calculating sociopath, Erica. How can you stand there holding a baby and act like this? I am your sister. I am the mother of your nieces. You have millions of dollars sitting in the bank right now, and you are tossing pocket change at me like I am a beggar. I need real money. I need access to the accounts. You cannot just leave me with nothing. You owe me." I paused on the second step of the grand staircase and slowly turned around. I looked down at her frantic red tear-smeared face. I owed her nothing. She had spent a lifetime taking everything from me, and the concept that the well had finally run dry was fundamentally incomprehensible to her. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My absolute silence and the cold, unyielding stare of our grandfather standing at the top of the stairs answered her demands perfectly. I simply raised my right hand and gestured toward the massive front windows of the foyer. Vanessa followed my gaze, her breath hitching in her throat. The heavy oak front doors had remained wide open after the police dragged our mother out and chased Derek into the night. Now a new presence loomed on the front porch. A large, heavily built man wearing a sweat-stained work shirt and a severely irritated expression stomped over the threshold. He was the foreman of the luxury moving company Barbara had hired earlier that morning to haul their lavish wardrobes and expensive furniture into my home. Two other burly workers flanked him, looking equally furious. "Hey!" The foreman barked, his booming voice cutting through the lingering tension of the room. "Who is in charge here? Because we have a massive problem." Vanessa immediately tried to resurrect her shattered authority. She straightened her posture and wiped the smeared mascara from her cheeks, attempting to summon the haughty, dismissive tone she always used with service workers. "Excuse me," Vanessa snapped, taking a step toward the man. "You do not just barge into a private residence and start shouting. Go back outside and wait by your trucks. We are dealing with a family emergency." The foreman let out a harsh, barking laugh. He completely ignored her posture and her tone. "Lady, I do not care if the house is on fire," he said, pulling a digital payment terminal from his clipboard. "The credit card that older woman gave me earlier just declined for the fourth time. All three of my trucks are fully loaded with your fancy furniture, your ridiculously heavy statues, and about 50 wardrobe boxes." My crew has been sitting out there for hours waiting for authorization. We are not unloading a single lamp into this house until I get paid in full. Now are you providing a new card, or am I dumping everything you own right on the front lawn? Vanessa's face drained of color. She instinctively patted the designer purse hanging from her shoulder, but she knew it was a completely futile gesture. Every piece of plastic in her wallet was permanently blocked by the federal government. She was broke. She had absolutely no way to pay a premium moving company. She looked back at me, her eyes silently pleading, hoping the public embarrassment of a scene with contractors would force me to open my checkbook. I stepped down from the staircase and walked across the foyer, moving past my sister as if she were completely invisible. I approached the foreman. "What is the total outstanding balance for the move?" I asked, my voice polite and strictly professional. The man looked me up and down, sensing immediately that the power dynamic in the room rested entirely with me. He checked his clipboard. 3 trucks, full-service luxury packing, weekend premium rate, and hazardous item fees for those massive marble urns. The total comes to exactly $4,800. I shifted Leo higher on my shoulder, reached into my tote bag, and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope. I had visited the bank several days ago to prepare for any unexpected cash requirements during this operation. I opened the flap and began counting out crisp $100 bills. I did not stop at $4,800. I counted out exactly $9,600 and handed the thick stack of cash to the stunned foreman. "Here is your payment in full, plus a 100% bonus for your time. Your extreme patience and the inconvenience caused by my mother's fraudulent credit cards," I stated clearly. The foreman's eyes widened as he flipped through the stack of bills, quickly verifying the staggering amount. He tucked the money securely into his shirt pocket, and his entire demeanor shifted from hostile to incredibly accommodating. "Thank you, ma'am," he said with a respectful nod. "We will start unloading the trucks and bringing the boxes inside right away. Which rooms do you want the furniture placed in?" I shook my head. "You are not bringing a single item into this house." Vanessa gasped, stepping forward. "Erica, what are you doing? That is all of my stuff. My clothes, my shoes, the girls' toys. You cannot just leave it on the trucks." I ignored her entirely, keeping my focus locked on the foreman. "I have a very specific set of instructions for that generous bonus I just paid you," I told him. "You are going to take all 3 of those trucks loaded with every single box belonging to Barbara, Vanessa, and Derek. You are going to drive them straight across the county line to the Starlight Motel on Route 9. It is the cheapest, sleaziest, most run-down property on the outskirts of the city. You are going to drive your trucks into their back parking lot, open the cargo doors, and dump every single item right onto the asphalt. Do not pack it neatly. Do not arrange it. Just dump it." The foreman stared at me for a split second, a slow smirk spreading across his face as he realized exactly what kind of family drama he had just walked into. He slapped his clipboard against his thigh. "You got it, boss," he said with a sharp nod. "Consider it done." He turned to his crew, pointing at the massive pile of Louis Vuitton trunks and Prada weekenders Vanessa had hauled into my foyer earlier. "Grab all this luxury garbage and throw it in the back of truck number 3, he ordered. "We are making a delivery to Route 9. The movers did not hesitate. They surged forward, grabbing the expensive leather bags by their delicate handles and dragging them roughly across the hardwood floor. Vanessa screamed, lunging forward to grab the handle of a large Gucci suitcase. "Stop it!" she shrieked, pulling against the burly mover. "You are scratching the leather. Leave my things alone." The mover simply yanked the bag out of her grip with effortless strength, almost sending her tumbling to the floor. "Lady, you heard the boss?" He grunted, tossing the suitcase onto his shoulder. "This stuff goes to the Starlight." Within minutes, the foyer was completely cleared of the invading luggage. The massive mountain of entitlement and arrogant luxury had been dragged out the door and tossed carelessly into the back of a moving truck. The heavy diesel engines roared to life outside, filling the air with the smell of exhaust. The trucks shifted into gear and rolled slowly down the driveway, carrying away the entire stolen kingdom Barbara and Vanessa had built. Vanessa was forced to her feet. The adrenaline and the rage had completely burned out of her system, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, trembling shell of utter defeat. She stood in the center of the vast, empty foyer, clutching her small designer purse tightly against her chest. She looked up at Grandpa Thomas, who had remained a silent, unyielding sentinel at the top of the stairs. He did not blink. He did not offer a comforting smile. He simply watched the final trash being taken out. She looked at me. There were no more screams. There were no more threats. There was only a profound, terrifying realization that she had played her final card and completely lost. I did not say another word to her. The silence was the most absolute, definitive answer I could give. With no options left, no husband to protect her, no mother to scheme for her, and no money to shield her from reality, Vanessa turned around. She walked slowly toward the open front door. Her shoulders were slumped, her posture broken. The grand, elegant woman who had marched into my home hours earlier, demanding my immediate eviction, was reduced to a shuffling shadow. She crossed the threshold, stepping out onto the front porch. The moment her expensive shoes touched the exterior stone, the sky finally broke. The heavy dark clouds that had been gathering all morning suddenly opened up. Torrential rain began to pour down in massive, blinding sheets. It was a sudden, violent deluge that instantly soaked the world in freezing water. Vanessa walked down the porch steps and stepped onto the paved driveway. The heavy rain immediately plastered her perfectly styled hair to the sides of her face. Her expensive silk skirt darkened with water clinging heavily to her legs. She walked slowly, the water pooling in her designer shoes. She did not run. She simply trudged forward through the absolute downpour. She reached the very end of the long, sweeping driveway, stopping right at the edge of the manicured street. She turned around. The rain was washing away the last traces of her makeup, leaving her face pale and streaked with dark gray tracks. She stood there, soaking wet, shivering violently in the cold wind. She looked back at the grand, illuminated estate. She stood there expecting me to finally cave. She was waiting for the inevitable moment when the weak, subservient sister she had always bullied would run out into the storm with an umbrella and a blanket. She expected me to beg her to come back inside, to forgive her terrible behavior, and offer her a warm bed and a hot meal. She stood in the pouring rain, waiting for the old Erica to rescue her. I stood inside the warm, dry foyer. I looked through the rain-streaked glass of the massive front doors, watching her shiver at the end of the driveway. I shifted Leo gently in my arms, making sure his blanket was secure. Then I reached out, gripped the heavy brass handles of the double doors, and pushed them firmly together. The heavy oak slammed shut with a solid, definitive click, locking the locks and engaging the deadbolt. The golden child was finally left out in the cold. Erica doesn't flinch. She simply shuts the heavy oak door, the deadbolt engaging with a loud final click. The storm rages outside, but inside her home it is warm, peaceful, and entirely safe. The catastrophic noise of the police sirens, the frantic splashing of footsteps on the wet pavement, and the desperate, pathetic demands of a sister who had finally run out of victims were completely sealed away. I stood in the grand foyer for a long, silent moment, listening to the heavy rain battering the thick glass of the windows. I looked down at the two crisp $100 bills, still resting exactly where I had dropped them on the polished hardwood floor. They were a monument to a closed chapter, the absolute final transaction between me and the toxic bloodline I was officially leaving behind. I reached down, picked them up, and walked toward the kitchen to put the kettle on. The long, exhausting war was finally over. 6 months later, the harsh, biting cold of that violent winter afternoon had long since melted away, replaced by the bright, golden warmth of early summer. The morning sunlight poured generously through the towering floor-to-ceiling windows of my sunroom, illuminating a space that had become the true beating heart of our home. It was no longer a staging ground for ambushes or a battlefield for vicious family politics. It was a sanctuary of absolute peace. I sat comfortably in a plush linen armchair, sipping a cup of hot black coffee, watching a scene that brought an immense, profound joy to my chest. Grandpa Thomas was sitting cross-legged on a brightly colored foam play mat in the center of the sunroom floor. He looked completely transformed. The hollow, vacant stare induced by Dr. Evans's heavy sedatives was a distant, evaporating nightmare. Today, his eyes were sharp, bright, and full of vibrant life. The color had returned to his cheeks, and the commanding, brilliant patriarch I had always loved was fully restored to his former glory. He was laughing, a rich, booming sound that echoed warmly off the glass walls as he pushed a small stack of wooden alphabet blocks across the mat. Baby Leo, now a sturdy, energetic little boy, let out a delighted, high-pitched shriek. He crawled forward with surprising speed and slapped his tiny hands against the carefully constructed tower of blocks, sending them toppling to the floor in a clattering wooden avalanche. Thomas gasped in mock horror, scooping Leo up by his waist and blowing loud raspberries against the baby's stomach, which sent Leo into a fit of uncontrollable, breathless giggles. Seeing them together healthy, safe, and thriving was the absolute vindication of every difficult, ruthless choice I had been forced to make. We had survived the fire and we were flourishing in the light. The gentle melodic chime of the front doorbell broke the morning quiet. I set my coffee mug down on the glass side table and walked through the sunlit hallway to answer it. Standing on the front porch, looking as impeccably tailored and sharply professional as he had the day he dismantled my mother's fraudulent empire, was Attorney Caldwell. He carried a slim, distressed leather briefcase under his arm and offered a warm, genuine smile that reached his piercing eyes. "Good morning," Erica Caldwell greeted me, stepping over the threshold as I opened the door wide. "I hope I am not interrupting playtime." I could hear Leo laughing all the way from the driveway. "You are perfectly on time," I replied, returning his smile and leading him back through the house toward the sunroom. "And you are always welcome here. You are practically family at this point." Caldwell had proven to be much more than just a brilliant litigator. He had been a steadfast ally, a relentless protector of my grandfather's civil rights, and the meticulous architect of our absolute victory over the people who had tried to destroy us. We entered the sunroom and Thomas looked up, offering Caldwell a respectful, deeply appreciative nod before returning his full attention to Leo's scattered blocks. Caldwell took a seat on the comfortable sofa opposite my armchair, placing his leather briefcase precisely on the center of the coffee table. The casual pleasantries faded slightly, replaced by his signature, focused, businesslike demeanor. "I have the final paperwork ready for your signature," Caldwell announced, snapping the polished brass clasps of his briefcase open. "But before we get to the legalities of the trust, I wanted to provide you with the latest finalized updates regarding the federal proceedings against your mother and your brother-in-law." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly in my lap. I felt no anxiety, only a cold, clinical curiosity about the exact dimensions of their ruin. "I am listening." Caldwell pulled a crisp, heavily indexed folder from his case. "The federal prosecutor's office finalized their plea agreements late yesterday afternoon. As we anticipated, Barbara did not have the stamina, the psychological fortitude, or the financial resources to face a drawn-out, highly publicized federal trial. When presented with the insurmountable mountain of evidence we provided regarding the forged medical documents, the systematic bribery of Dr. Evans, and the documented draining of Thomas's investment accounts, she opted to avoid a jury entirely." "What was the final sentence?" I asked, watching a bird flutter past the sunroom window. "She pleaded guilty to felony elder financial abuse and federal wire fraud," Caldwell stated, adjusting his glasses. The federal judge was not in a lenient mood given the highly premeditated, predatory nature of the crime against her own vulnerable father. Barbara was sentenced to a mandatory 5-year term in a federal penitentiary. Furthermore, she has been permanently barred from acting as a fiduciary or holding power of attorney in any capacity for the rest of her natural life. The woman who had obsessed over exclusive country club memberships, who had measured a person's worth entirely by the designer labels they wore, was now wearing a standard-issue uniform. Her entire identity, built on stolen superiority, had been stripped away by her own boundless greed. And Derek White prompted, remembering the frantic, cowardly way he had shoved a police officer and sprinted down my affluent street in the pouring rain, leaving his wife to take the fall. Caldwell allowed a small, incredibly humorless smirk to touch the corners of his lips. Derek's situation escalated rapidly from a local disaster to a full-scale, inescapable federal nightmare. The financial investigators did not stop at the fake corporate lease agreement for his downtown mistress. They dug into the very foundation of his supposed technology startup. As it turns out, The entire cryptocurrency mining operation was an elaborately constructed massive Ponzi scheme. He was using Thomas's stolen funds to pay off early investors to maintain the illusion of profitability. I shook my head, marveling at the sheer breathtaking scope of their arrogant deception. So he is facing much more than just accessory charges to my mother's elder abuse. Significantly more, Caldwell confirmed, tapping a page in his file. He is currently under a joint aggressive investigation by the FBI and the Internal Revenue Service. They have seized all of his remaining electronic assets, confiscated his servers, and frozen every single one of his shell corporations. He is looking at decades of potential prison time for tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. His faux empire has completely collapsed. He is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, desperately scrambling to find a defense attorney willing to take a hopelessly doomed case pro bono. Which brings us to Vanessa, I noted softly. The image of my sister standing in the freezing rain, stripped of her designer luggage, her massive luxury cars, and her arrogant superiority still lingered in my mind. She had begged for a hotel room, unable to fathom a reality where she was not catered to. Caldwell flipped to the final page in his update folder. Vanessa is experiencing a rather brutal, uncompromising introduction to the reality she spent her entire adult life avoiding. With Derek's assets seized by the federal government and his impending massive criminal charges, she filed for a highly contested, incredibly messy divorce. Unfortunately for her, there are absolutely no marital assets left to divide. The banks successfully foreclosed on their luxury home within 6 weeks of the initial asset freeze. The Porsche and the Range Rover were aggressively repossessed. She is currently drowning in legal fees she cannot possibly afford to pay. Where is she living now? I asked, my voice entirely devoid of sympathy. She managed to secure a very cramped, incredibly modest studio apartment in a highly undesirable part of the city. Caldwell replied, his tone entirely matter-of-fact. And to meet the strict court-ordered requirements for basic living expenses, and to pay her partial restitution to the estate, she has been forced to take the only employment she could qualify for, with zero actual work experience. She is currently working a minimum-wage retail job at a discount clothing store in a suburban strip mall. The absolute total fall from grace was staggering. Vanessa, who had once mocked my career, who had belittled my home, and who had demanded I surrender my sanctuary to fund her vanity, was now folding discounted sweaters for minimum wage. She was returning to a tiny, empty studio apartment every single night, riding the city bus because she could no longer afford a vehicle. She had lost her deceitful husband, she had lost her scheming mother, and she had lost every single penny of her stolen, unearned wealth. The universe had delivered a flawless, uncompromising, unyielding justice. Caldwell closed the update folder and pulled out a thick, legal-sized document bound in heavy blue cardstock. He slid it across the smooth glass coffee table toward me. Now on to the actual most important business of the day, Caldwell said, his voice warming with genuine professional satisfaction. This is the final recorded deed to the restored family trust. I looked down at the heavy document. It represented months of relentless, aggressive, brilliant litigation. I had worked closely with Caldwell and a specialized team of forensic accountants to track down every single dollar Barbara, Vanessa, and Derek had attempted to hide. We had been utterly merciless. We had successfully liquidated Barbara's remaining legitimate assets, seized her hidden offshore safety nets, auctioned off Vanessa's seized jewelry, and clawed back the tens of thousands of dollars Derek had funneled to his mistress. We recovered it all. Caldwell confirmed accurately, reading the quiet triumph in my expression. Every single penny stolen from Thomas's estate has been returned with interest. The financial damage has been completely legally reversed. I looked over at my grandfather. He was holding Leo up high in the air, making joyful airplane noises, while the baby laughed in pure, unfiltered delight. Thomas caught my eye over Leo's shoulder and offered a gentle, knowing smile. He nodded toward the document on the table, giving his absolute blessing. And per Thomas's explicit, unyielding instructions, Caldwell continued tapping the heavy blue document with his expensive silver pen. He has legally transferred the entirety of his multi-million-dollar estate into this new protected entity. It is an ironclad, unbreakable trust fund established exclusively and permanently for baby Leo. You are named as the sole executor and primary trustee until Leo reaches the age of 35. Barbara and Vanessa have been permanently legally excised from the bloodline's finances. They can never touch a single dime. I stared at the heavy blue document resting on the glass. It was not just a legal contract. It was a massive, impenetrable shield. It was an absolute guarantee that my beautiful son would never know the financial terror, the emotional manipulation, or the vicious cruelty I had endured for my entire life. It was the ultimate, unyielding protection against the toxic greed that had infected our family tree for generations. I reached out and took the silver pen Caldwell offered. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line and signed my name with a fluid, bold, confident stroke. I flipped to the next page and signed again, legally cementing my son's secure, untouchable, brilliant future. Caldwell collected the document, carefully checked the notarized signatures, and slid it safely back into his leather briefcase. "Congratulations, Erica," he said quietly, a deep respect resonating in his voice. "The estate is secure. Your family is entirely safe." I thanked him, walking him to the front door and watching him drive away down the peaceful, sunlit, tree-lined street. When I returned to the warm light of the sunroom, Thomas was sitting back on the comfortable sofa, resting his hands peacefully on his knees. Leo was crawling rapidly across the playmat, absolutely determined to capture a stray wooden block that had rolled away. I walked over, knelt on the soft mat, and scooped my son up into my arms. I held him close to my chest, breathing in the sweet, clean, perfect scent of his hair. I looked around my beautiful, quiet home, listening to the peaceful, golden stillness of the morning. I looked at my grandfather, who was watching us with eyes full of immense pride and unconditional, authentic love. I had lost a mother who only viewed me as an obstacle to be removed. I had lost a sister who only viewed me as a punching bag to elevate her own fragile ego. I had lost a toxic, abusive, parasitic family that had tried to drain the very life and future from my veins. But looking down at Leo's bright, innocent, smiling face, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I had won the ultimate prize. I had broken the generational curse of manipulation, emotional abuse, and insatiable greed. I had successfully claimed my own power, drawn an unbreakable boundary of steel, and protected the people who truly, genuinely mattered. I held my son tighter against my heart, and a genuine, beautifully unburdened smile spread across my face. We had built a true, loving family from the absolute ashes of their ruin, and our future was finally permanently our own. Erica's journey teaches us a profound truth about family and self-worth. Blood relations do not guarantee loyalty, and shared history does not excuse ongoing emotional or financial abuse. For years, Erica endured the crushing weight of her family's toxic entitlement, functioning as their designated scapegoat while they paraded their false superiority. Her story proves that true power does not come from screaming matches or stooping to a manipulator's level. True power comes from recognizing your own unyielding value and drawing an unbreakable boundary. We often fall into the trap of believing we must constantly rescue those who share our DNA, even when they are actively destroying our peace. Vanessa, Barbara, and Derek built an illusion of high society success, funded entirely by deceit, arrogance, and theft. When that fraudulent foundation crumbled, they instantly turned on each other, proving that relationships built on greed will always inevitably collapse. Erica did not have to fight them in the mud to win. She simply stood firmly in the truth, protected her grandfather, and let the natural severe consequences of their own actions completely dismantle their empire. Breaking a generational curse requires immense courage. It demands looking at the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally and finally accepting them for exactly who they are, rather than who you wish they would be. By walking away from the toxicity and legally securing her son's future, Erica did not just save herself. She ensured that the cycle of manipulation died entirely, proving that a true family is built on mutual respect, authentic love, and absolute safety. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace, you know exactly how heavy that door feels when it finally clicks shut. Share your own stories of setting firm boundaries and reclaiming your life in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and the courage to build a beautiful life on your own terms.